Westeros is a medieval hell, one where war, famine, and magical monstrosities assail its citizens from all angles. And in the life of your average Westerosi, it's rare for them to go even a decade without suffering due to the machinations of men and monster alike. But there are a few who have lived and died over the many millennia that constitute this world's storied history that can be counted amongst the worst of the worst. Harren the Black, Maegor the Cruel, Aegon IV. All of these names evoke some of the worst crimes ever committed on Westerosi soil, and as we witness the events of the story we're shown playing out in the current day, we find many more monsters making a sordid name for themselves in this world. Tywin and Cersei Lannister, Roose and Ramsay Bolton, Balon and Euron Greyjoy. But even amongst the beasts of both the past and the present, there is one man whose crimes rate him as perhaps one of the worst offenders in all of Westerosi history. A man who through shrewd manipulation and subtlety made it so it may not seem that way on the surface, but certainly is once you peel back the layers of his carefully crafted facade. And that man is none other than our subject of this video, Lord Petyr Baelish. Hello everyone, and welcome to the 252nd episode of Analyzing Evil. The patrons and members decided on Littlefinger as one of their picks for this year, and as one of the most mesmerizing characters the world of Ice and Fire has to offer, it's no surprise that they did. So in this video, we're going to explore all the ways in which I believe Littlefinger proves himself to be a man worthy of being counted as one of the worst villains in all of Westerosi history, taking you through everything we learn about him in both the books and the TV show to give you the most accurate portrait possible of his evil. And considering we have quite a lot to get through to do so, without further ado, let's begin. In a world like the world of Ice and Fire, where the lines between classes are written in the thickest, most permanent of inks, upward mobility for most people is but a fantasy. The lowborn people of Westeros have as much chance of becoming a lord as a dragon does of fitting into a bottle. The odd man here or there will be granted a title by the graces of an eccentric lord or monarch from time to time, and sometimes a handsome young man or woman will catch the eye of someone of high birth and gain the riches and prestige yearned for by their fellow commoners through marriage. But whenever scenarios like these have played out over Westerosi history, they prove to be the exception rather than the rule. That being said, like many things in Westeros, there is one more or less reliable way to achieve nobility if one's heart is set on it, cloaking yourself in valor, honor, and chivalry by engaging in combat in one of the countless wars and petty conflicts that are more often being waged than they aren't in this tumultuous world. Soldiers have little chance of becoming lords, that's true enough, but any man has a chance at becoming a knight. And once they do become a knight, then they have the greatest chance statistically of becoming a lord when compared to the average commoner, depending on their deeds and the connections they forge with the lords and ladies who employ them, of course. Some knights even reach a level of power and prestige greater than that of some small lords. Landed knights, knights who have obtained a keep to dwell in and own the lands that surround it, are counted as minor members of the nobility, which is in contrast to hedge knights, who gained their label due to their nomadic existence traveling from conflict to conflict and sleeping even in hedges if they needed to. For House Baelish, it would be through this knightly course that they would gain their claim to nobility, however minor that claim might have been. In A Storm of Swords, Petyr mentions to Sansa that his great-grandfather was a mercenary in the employ of House Corbray, a vassal house of the Arryns of the Vale. With Petyr being born in 268 AC, and with the events of A Game of Thrones beginning in 299 AC, that would mean that Petyr is either 30 or 31 when we're first introduced to him, placing the origins of his family's arrival in Westeros somewhere in the realm of 80 to 120 years ago, between either the reigns of Baelor the Blessed, who ruled between 161 to 171 AC, Aegon IV, who reigned from 172 to 184 AC, or Daeron II, who reigned between 184 AC and 209 AC. Despite the tumultuous nature of Baelor and Aegon's reigns, especially with Aegon's legitimization of his bastards and the subsequent Blackfire Rebellion during Daeron's reign, the Vale managed to come out of all this turmoil relatively unscathed, with the natural fortifications provided by their mountainous home ensuring any conflicts that happened to reach their territory were largely ineffective, something that suited the aristocratic and isolationist lords of the Vale just fine. Now the Vale of Arryn, as it's referred to now, was the original landing site of the Andals when they first migrated from Essos to Westeros as mercenaries at the behest of two claimants to the title of King of the Fingers, which is the specific area of the Vale that they arrived in. And despite their history as immigrants to this land, the lords descended from these men ended up forming a highly aristocratic society with rigid class lines, even when compared to the rest of Westeros, holding claims to pure Andal bloodlines and stability at the expense of all else as core aspects of their culture, clinging to xenophobia as much as their natural fortifications to keep their holdings safe, with a deep suspicion of quote-unquote new men and foreign-born upstarts dictating how relations between men of the Vale and newcomers were handled. That being said, it was by no means impossible for a foreign-born man to find a place for himself in the Vale, for once upon a time, men from Essos landed in the Fingers, and those men went on to conquer entire kingdoms, so what better place for a foreigner looking to make his fortunes to land? That could have been what Petyr's great-grandfather thought when he came to Westeros as a mercenary, and if that's what he suspected, his suspicions proved to be true, in a sense at least. The house that he would be employed by, House Corbray, has a long and storied history when compared to some other lesser houses, with the Corbrays counting their ancestors amongst the Andal host that first landed in the Vale anywhere between 2,000 and 6,000 years ago. Like most regions of Westeros during that era, the Vale was divided into several different petty kingdoms, with one of those kingdoms being in the Fingers, and the ruler of that kingdom known as King of the Fingers, as I mentioned earlier. At that time, there were 2 claimants to the title, King Jon Brightstone and King Tywin Shell, both hiring Andal warlords to aid them in their war against the other. Both kings would end up being betrayed by them, with an Andal knight by the name of Corwin Corbray taking Jon Brightstone's daughter as his wife, and Tywin Shell's wife as his bedwarmer afterwards to legitimize his newfound claim as Lord of the Fingers, taking the seat of Hearthstone as his base of power. For many centuries afterwards, House Corbray would count themselves as one of the major vassals of House Arryn, and a significant regional power, sprouting from their lineage legendary heroes like Leowen Corbray, who served as protector of the realm during the Dance of Dragons, and Sir Corwin Corbray, who married Princess Rhaena Targaryen. And with such prestige and storied men amongst their ranks came the wealth and resources that afforded them the ability to hire mercenaries. And so it would be that they would hire Petyr's great-grandfather to fight for them in some unknown conflict. However, whatever status House Corbray once had has been severely diminished by the time we're introduced to this world, with their position in the nobility more so attributed to lineage, and their possession of the Valyrian steel sword Lady Forlorn rather than wealth or power. After Petyr's great-grandfather presumably toiled for some time in the employ of Lord Corbray, he would eventually father a son who would rise a rank above him to become a Hedge Knight, who took the titan of his father's native Braavos as his sigil once he rose a rank once again, and became a landed knight after acquiring a tract of land on the smallest of the Fingers, with his son after him being granted the title of Lord, and inhabiting a drab and stony flint keep that his father may have constructed, making his house a vassal of House Corbray, and himself a man who was referred to by those who knew him as the smallest of small lords. And indeed, the smallest of small lords was an apt title for him. The Baelish's Keep, which Petyr referred to mockingly as the Drear Fort, was in all likelihood the most pathetic lordly holding in the entire 7 kingdoms, with a single stone keep with only arrow slits to serve as windows, and 3 one-room floors making up their ancestral home, with the surrounding holdings consisting only of a flock of sheep, a village of a dozen families near a peat bog, and a hermit's cave, offering no place for large ships to dock owing to the rocky shores that surrounded the small peninsula. Despite this, the Vale, as one of the least socially mobile regions of the 7 kingdoms, was an environment that would have embittered and quietly humiliated a house like Baelish's, whose founder came from mercenary stock, ensuring the Baelishes were not only considered small for their holdings, but for their heritage as well, even if they had been accepted into the ranks. So while their newfound wealth in this country must have been something they were grateful for, it's reasonable to assume that no amount of integration made Petyr's ancestors feel as if they were anything more than foreign-born upstarts who need know their place in the world. This altogether noble and humble beginning is what Petyr Baelish was born into, and because of his family history, the circumstances of his birth, and the events of his childhood, Petyr had perhaps the most unique upbringing out of anyone in Westeros, let alone his fellow lords. Like anyone, Petyr's environment and his family station played a large role in shaping him into the man he became. The top-down nature of a class-based system comes with a few truths, but none more obvious than the fact that those at the bottom typically envy those at the top, and that those at the top enjoy privileges and luxuries those below them could only dream of having. That being said, most of us, no matter how aware we are of the suffering of those less fortunate than us, are more occupied with what concerns us personally in our lives. For a lord in his castle denied a jewel he coveted, that issue weighs more heavily on his mind than the sounds of hundreds or thousands of rumbling stomachs reverberating off his keep's walls. And from his perspective, his greatest problems, no matter how frivolous and self-centered they are more important to him than anything else. Likewise, the starving peasant cares nothing for his lord's problems when he has so many of his own to keep his mind occupied. Perspective is everything. The way you perceive the world, and what you prioritize as a result, is entirely ruled by your perception of what you need and what you want. If your basic needs are met, you put far less thought into their realization than you do into your desires, and vice versa. For Petyr, his family's position in the world and possessions were somewhat paradoxical in regard to shaping Petyr's character and worldview. The members of House Baelish likely live better than 99% of Westerosis, as most people struggle to keep for themselves a hovel in the city, or at best a hovel in the country, and a small plot of land to tend crops and raise livestock on. So to live in a keep, no matter how shabby, and possess the incomes provided by a small village and the livestock you own, is several magnitudes more than what most small folk possessed. But Petyr was not born of the small folk. He was born into a lordly house, and in Petyr's mind, he did not see what he and his family had as a blessing most people would kill for, and therefore himself as a fortunate person, but as a meager achievement when compared to the holdings of the nobility of the rest of the country, and thus a stain on his family's reputation. Not to mention his depressing, windswept, damp, and run-down keep he was so blessed to call a home, only further emphasizing for Petyr how sad his existence was, an existence that made him the most unfortunate lord out of all the other lords in Westeros. And that is what Petyr saw himself and his family as, not fortunate people, but unfortunate nobles. So even though Petyr had more than most, he grew up with an intense desire for more, the desire to become a greater lord being more important from his point of view than being grateful for what he had was. And in a world where a focus on upward mobility for the nobility, or playing the Game of Thrones so to speak, is just as important as breathing, you can't really blame Petyr for looking at his surroundings and everything his society expected of the aristocracy, and coming to the conclusion that what he had was not even close to being enough, or what he deserved. Further shaping Petyr's character in his youth were the values of the culture of both the land of his birth and the land of his ancestors' birth. In Westeros, there's a number of traits and values that form the bedrock of Westerosi culture. Chivalry, modesty, piety, nobility, and a strict adherence to social norms, the status quo, and class lines being some of the most prominent. The culture of his family's homeland, on the other hand, the free city of Braavos, was built on altogether different values. Braavos, the youngest of the free cities, was founded by escaped slaves who built their society on freedom, secrecy, cunning, and merit rather than bloodline or inheritance. Originally known as the Secret City, it concealed its location from Valyria for a century before emerging as a powerful maritime and financial hub. Its wealth and influence stem from trade and the Iron Bank, whose origins lie in the pooled savings of the city's founders and whose power can shape the fate of entire kingdoms. These differences could not be more apparent when comparing the Vale and Braavos, for the contrast between Braavosi meritocracy and Vale aristocracy could not be starker. Where Braavos rewarded cunning, trade, and adaptability, the Vale exalted bloodline, honor, and stability. Now what do these things mean for Petyr? It means that Petyr grew up being taught and believing in Westerosi values and cultural norms, for that's where he was born. And when someone is born in a particular place, you tend to adopt those values. But if we look at who Petyr is as an adult, what he does, and how he does things, we find his actions and methods to be in line with the treacherous nature of Westerosi nobles, yes, but more so with what you might expect someone from Braavos to engage in pursuit of greater wealth and power. It's plain to see by his family's use of the Titan of Braavos as their sigil that Braavos was not just a place of origin for them, but a home they left that still had a great impact on how they viewed the world and moved through it, with Braavosi traditions likely handed down to his grandfather by his great-grandfather, then from his grandfather to his father, and finally, from his father to Petyr. By the time Petyr is taught these traditions, however, he has become a dangerous fusion of both cultures, appearing on the outside to be a lord like any other in Westeros who upholds its values and is motivated by Westerosi culture, but in practice being a man whose actions and methods are distinctly Braavosi in nature. So while his desire to play the Game of Thrones was surely born from a mix of his circumstances and his witnessing and study of noble politics in Westeros, we can assume that who he is as a person mostly came as a result of the Braavosi values he was taught as a youth. And as much as this might seem like speculation, when you really look at Petyr's character, it's hard not to see how Braavosi culture shaped his personality. And for a man like Petyr, whose great-grandfather's legacy whispered of freedom earned through intellect rather than inheritance, the Vale's rigid hierarchy must have felt like a prison, disguised as a paradise. And indeed, that is what Petyr saw his home as. But fortunately for him, and unfortunately for everyone else in Westeros, he was given an opportunity to escape it. 8 years before Petyr's birth in 260 AC, the last Blackfire rebellion led by the final Blackfire pretender Maelys the Monstrous erupted in the Stepstones, the islands that separate Dorne from Essos, sparking a war that would come to be known as the War of the Nine Penny Kings. It was in this war that many prominent figures of this era made their claim to fame, with the likes of Barristan Selmy and Tywin Lannister winning renown and prestige for their actions during the war. While not all would be wreathed in laurels, this conflict afforded others the unique opportunity to come into close contact with knights and nobles they otherwise may not have. forging bonds and alliances by fighting side by side with one another. Petyr's father was one of the many lords who answered their king's call to arms, and it was during this war that he ended up meeting Lord Hoster Tully of Riverrun, Lord Paramount of the Trident, and forging a lifelong friendship with him, one of the most influential lords in the entirety of the Seven Kingdoms. In contrast to the Band of Nine, a group of Associate exiles, merchants, and sellsword captains who banded together to conquer kingdoms for themselves for whom the war was named, it should be noted that Petyr's father allied himself with a house allied with the king, showing his desire to elevate his own and the rest of his house's standing in Westeros, rather than allying with those who came from the same land as his ancestors. It would be somewhere between 15 and 16 years later that Lord Baelish would cash in on his friendship by requesting that his son Petyr become foster to Riverrun, a timeline we can glean from the fact that Petyr journeyed with the Tullys to Seaguard when Catelyn was 12 years old in 276 AC, and assuming that Petyr was sent off there around that time after Lord Tully accepted his father's offer. Now surely Petyr was taught Braavosi ways by his father prior to his departure from his home, but I would wager that this is where the lessons he was taught regarding his heritage came into play, as I can imagine his father, who must have recognized the great intelligence Petyr held, giving his son a speech before he shipped him off to Riverrun much akin to the following. Petyr, this family is no family of yours. I made a friend of Hoster Tully, yes, but friends, like anything my son, are tools to be used, and so too are the people you will come to see as your family. But always remember, my son, that they aren't, and so I beseech you, use them to your advantage, Petyr. Learn everything you can from them, and make them believe that you truly are one of them, for once they see you as one of their own, there's nothing that you can't do. So it is that his Braavosi ancestry, in a sense, isn't just a biographical detail, but the psychological seed of his entire philosophy, and his house's sigil, the head of the Titan of Braavos, is more than a nod to their origins. It's an emblem of Petyr's psyche. The Titan watches over Braavos, guiding it with unflinching power, and Petyr internalized this as the idea of unassailable strength, achieved through cleverness and control through the lessons instilled within him by his father. Yet unlike the Titan, who defends, Petyr would learn to use his intellect to dominate, becoming as he matured a twisted reflection of the very symbol his family once revered. And so it's with his wardship at Riverrun that one of the most unique characters ever born on this country's soil would embark on a journey to make himself into something greater. The end result of one man's journey to this land long ago to make something of himself and his family, and a boy who would go on to accomplish far greater things than his progenitor could have imagined. But before Petyr accomplished anything, he needed to grow like anyone else. And just as his birthplace, family home, and the upbringing his father provided him shaped who he was, so too would his time at Riverrun contribute mightily to the development of his personality and ambitions. Living at Riverrun, Petyr was given access to an education that would have been impossible for him to attain at his rocky home, and while learning further the ways of the world from the maesters, knights, and nobles who dwelt at Riverrun greatly expanded Petyr's knowledge. Equally as important were the relationships he forged with Hoster Tully's children, Edmure, Catelyn, and Lysa. So far I've referred to Petyr by his given name, but I'm sure everyone is more familiar with his nickname, Littlefinger, a name that was given to him by Edmure during his childhood as a jab at both Petyr's small physical stature and his family's small stature in the nobility. This derogatory and cruel nickname partially helped fuel Littlefinger's resentment and dislike for Edmure, but also his jealousy due to the latter being born into a life of privilege and riches, and being the heir to a well-respected house in the realm, while he was born in a minor house with low nobility. There were hints of him and Edmure getting along in their youth, as Edmure references them building a castle out of blocks in Lord Hoster's Solar and a feast for crows. But in retrospect, Edmure seems to view their childhood relationship more positively than Littlefinger, who holds nothing but hatred for him, showing that whatever positive memories he had meant nothing to him in the end, only focusing on how he slighted him when he was younger, though there is something else that amplified his hatred for Edmure to an even greater degree that we'll get to in a moment. Now, Littlefinger's relationship with Catelyn and Lysa, on the other hand, was different and complex by comparison. He expresses that he got along better with them than with Edmure, perhaps owing in part to his smaller stature making it so he was shunned by Edmure and the other boys his age. We don't know too much about what went on during their childhood, but it's safe to say that Littlefinger only grew closer to the Tully sisters as time went on, as one of the most defining aspects of his character is the deep love he ended up forming for Catelyn after developing a crush on her when they were children. And Littlefinger's relationship with Catelyn and Lysa evolved, or more appropriately, devolved, over their respective lives. In both the books and the show, Petyr is shown to have an intense amount of love for Catelyn stemming from his childhood, But Catelyn herself, being at least 5 years older than him, did not reciprocate his romantic feelings, instead choosing to love him as a brother. In the books, specifically in A Storm of Swords, it's mentioned that Littlefinger took a trip with the Tullys to Seaguard, as I mentioned earlier, camping at the Oldstones where Catelyn pretended to be Jenny of Oldstones, and Petyr played the role of the Prince of Dragonflies. To give more context, Jenny of Oldstones was a peasant girl who captured the heart of Prince Duncan Targaryen, the Prince of Dragonflies and heir to the Iron Throne. Duncan defied his father, King Aegon V, by marrying her for love, forsaking his crown and causing a royal scandal that rippled through Westeros for generations. The story of Jenny and Duncan became a romantic legend in A Song of Ice and Fire lore, a tale of doomed, forbidden love that transcended class but ended in tragedy, with both perishing in the tragedy at Summerhall. When Catelyn Tully and a young Petyr Baelish camped with her family at Oldstones, they playfully reenacted this story, Catelyn as Jenny and Petyr as the Prince of Dragonflies. But beneath their childish play lies a haunting foreshadowing of their adult relationship. Jenny and Duncan's love defied social boundaries, but Petyr's love for Catelyn could never bridge theirs. To Petyr, that moment symbolized the possibility of a love that transcends birth and class, a fantasy where he too could rise above his station. But to Catelyn, it was just a game from childhood. Keeping this memory as one of his most precious, even well into adulthood, in Petyr's mind, he came to view himself as someone akin to the Prince of Dragonflies. And most importantly, he has never stopped playing that role, ever trying to rewrite a story that was never real to begin with. This is a crucial piece of Littlefinger's psychology, as most of these accounts of his childhood in both the books and the show, from his perceived hardships to his undying love for Catelyn, are told almost entirely from his perspective. A perspective that might be a warped, thinly veiled excuse to pursue his fantasy of greater power, a component of which includes attaining the girl above his league. And in this way, sticking it to those who thought he was unworthy of her, and of being seen in a respectable manner compared to all of the other nobles in Westerosi high society. But the Prince of Dragonflies role he figuratively never stopped playing is just a small component of his relationship with Catelyn, and Lysa for that matter, and more importantly, of how he views himself. In the books, specifically in A Game of Thrones and A Storm of Swords, along with a brief mention in the Histories and Lore video on House Baelish, it stated that Littlefinger would try to regularly engage in kissing games at the Godswood of Riverrun with Lysa and Catelyn, with an attempt to get more intimate with the latter. However, as I stated before, despite believing himself to be truly in love with her, Catelyn never reciprocated his feelings, and she would often back away whenever he tried to stick his tongue in her mouth. But Lysa welcomed and enjoyed the intimacy Petyr tried to express towards her, even though she was not the true object of his affections. This event isn't shown to us in the show, but when Lords Blackwood and Bracken, the lords of two houses sworn to House Tully during this era, came to Riverrun to settle a dispute, Petyr and Catelyn performed 6 dances together at the ensuing feast, and when he tried to kiss her, she pushed him away and laughed at him. Clearly dejected by this, he got extremely drunk, passing out on the table before Brynden Tully, otherwise known as the Blackfish, brought him to his bed. Before he fell asleep, Lysa snuck into his bedroom and proceeded to assault him, all while he was under the impression that Catelyn was the one committing the act, which was likely due to him being inebriated. For years, Baelish would brag about this moment, as he was under the assumption that it was his beloved cat who slept with him, letting Tyrion and Sansa know that it was he who took her maidenhood. This demonstrates that despite how traumatizing this event would be to the average person, Littlefinger was the kind of man who wore this as a badge of honor. And even on the off chance he did overhear Lysa's breakdown to Sansa in the 3rd book shortly before her death, where she revealed that she was the one who assaulted him, and not Catelyn, was pregnant with his child, and terminated her pregnancy with moon tea, which was essentially an herbal tea that acted as a termination pill during this time period, at the command of her father, it's more than likely that he would have remained unaffected by this revelation. Even after being turned down by Catelyn at the dance, Littlefinger showed persistence by attempting to court her during her marriage to Brandon Stark, wearing only a helm, breastplate, and chainmail, ready to win the love of his life through combat at only 15 years old. Accepting his challenge, Brandon, being 5 years older, took off most of his armor to make the fight fairer. As their duel began, Littlefinger proceeded to ask Catelyn for her favor, a common practice amongst knights, duelists, and jousters, especially if they were attempting to court them. Gaining that was seen as a token of appreciation, good luck, knightly chivalry, and courtly love, and she refused to give it to him, instead choosing to bestow her favor to Brandon. This might have been part of the reason Littlefinger lost the fight to Brandon, as her refusal to grant him her favor likely led to a steep drop in confidence due to the public humiliation this brought him. However, his chances of winning the duel even if she gave him her favor were still extremely low anyway, considering Brandon was a much more skilled fighter with years of training, and according to George R.R. Martin, the best swordsman and jouster amongst his siblings, even more so than Ned. Despite being given multiple chances to yield, Littlefinger refused to give up, resulting in him suffering several wounds until the last one, which Petyr described later on in the story as a token of Brandon's esteem from navel to collarbone, ended the fight, one that Catelyn in the moment thought was a mortal wound. In that moment, Brandon was prepared to end Petyr's life. However, Catelyn, who viewed Petyr as a brother, begged Brandon not to kill Petyr, which he agreed to do, likely out of consideration of her feelings that he was just a boy and that he was a pseudo-brother to her, not wanting to start off the marriage badly. Littlefinger gives his account of this event in full to Roz in the show when he expresses to her his desire to save himself for his beloved cat, something he explains to her after she states that the woman he's saving for himself must be very beautiful for him to not want to have sex with Roz and the other prostitutes. "No, not really. Impeccable bloodlines though," says Petyr. "I do believe my lord's in love," says Roz. "For many years, most of my life really, and she loved me too. I was her little confidant, her plaything. She could tell me anything, anything at all. She told me about all the horses that she liked, the castle she wanted to live in, and the men she wanted to marry, a northerner with a jaw like an anvil. So I challenged him to a duel. I mean, why not? I'd read all the stories. The little hero always beats the big villain at the end of the stories. In the end, she wouldn't even let him kill me. He's just a boy," she said. "Please don't hurt him." So he gave me a nice little scar to remember him by, and off they went. Is she still married to him? Oh no, he got himself killed before the wedding, and she ended up with his brother, an even more impressive specimen. She loves him, I'm afraid. And why shouldn't she? I mean, who could compare to him? He's just so good. Do you know what I learned from losing that duel? I learned that I'll never win. Not that way. That's their game, their rules. I'm not going to fight them. I'm going to fuck them. That's what I know. That's what I am. And only by admitting what we are can we get what we want. And what do you want? Oh, everything, my dear. Everything there is. Throughout this entire conversation, Littlefinger oozes of not only jealousy, but resentment. And in his mind, he acts as the hero of his own story based on how he describes his role in the duel, a figurative David to Brandon Stark's Goliath. As he tells this story, we see that his motivation stems from not only wanting to get back at those who wronged him, but to gain everything his heart desires, acknowledging that the Westerosi game he plays is played with that Braavosi cunning we talked about earlier. Not only does he want everything, which can be inferred not just from this quote, but another one he says to Sansa later down the line when she's about to leave King's Landing and marry Loras Tyrell, where he states, and I quote, "It doesn't matter what we want. Once we get it, all we want is something else." But without overstating it, he will do absolutely anything possible to attain his goals. But this is something we'll discuss more later on. Now let's get back to how all this connects to his relationship with Catelyn, so we can answer a very important question, whether or not his feelings for Catelyn are a sincere form of love or an obsession. When taking into consideration everything we know about their relationship and Littlefinger's attitude towards it, I believe it's best viewed as something that became an unhealthy obsession, but that it didn't start out that way, as when he was a child, he was likely just a boy with an innocent first crush. And up until he was 15 and had that duel with Brandon, he showed no signs that he was a calculating manipulator with lofty ambitions that would transcend the status of his house, or more appropriately, himself. At this stage, he was just an idealistic boy who believed in fairy tale rescues, which is made evident by the play activities he would regularly engage in with her, like when he and Catelyn acted out the Jenny of Oldstone story. There's also the fact that during his duel with the older and more physically formidable Brandon Stark, he was willing to die for her multiple times, refusing to yield and resulting in him getting a life-threatening injury, which could be interpreted as a true, profound sense of love that went beyond a desire for status that the family line would bring him. Though it could be argued that his actions were more so taken out of pride than anything else, not wanting to wound it further after she refused to give Littlefinger her favor during the duel. But it's clear that once Littlefinger reached adulthood and his goals and desires in life became more established, that love formed into what can be described as an unhealthy obsession. Now, Petyr saw his relationship and potential marriage to Catelyn as a ticket for him to escape his station in life, her love being the trophy of high status that would prove to everyone around him that he was not the low-born boy he thought himself to be. something that was solidified for us during his conversation with Roz, as during that conversation, when she inquires about the woman he's saving himself for, the first thing he brings up are her impeccable bloodlines, viewing his love for her as a means to an end and to demonstrate to those he believes look down upon him that he was capable of winning her, that he is the downtrodden hero who got the girl at the end after all. Catelyn Tully is the emotional cornerstone of Petyr Baelish's entire life, the spark that ignited both his ambition and his resentment, and she represents the first time he encountered the limits of his social class. Her rejection doesn't just wound him romantically, it humiliates him socially. From that point on, every act of manipulation, betrayal, and ambition he takes can be traced back to this primal wound and the seeds of resentment already sprouting within him due to the circumstances of his birth, a need to prove his worth in a world that deemed him unworthy right from the outset. So by adulthood, Littlefinger's love for Catelyn has morphed into something deeply possessive and objectifying. His feelings are not about her as a person, but what she represents: beauty, status, unattainable nobility, and validation, which again is made clear to us during his conversation with Roz. Describing her as only someone who has impeccable bloodlines exposes the truth. His affection is commodified. Catelyn is less a person he cherishes and more a symbol of everything he was denied. In this way, Catelyn becomes both his muse and his justification. Every cruel act he commits can be seen as his attempt to rewrite the humiliation of that rejection, but also to right the perceived wrongs inflicted upon him by his family station. One of Littlefinger's most infamous quotes is his assertion to Varys that chaos is a ladder, and while we'll be talking about this concept more later on, suffice to say that Catelyn in many ways became in Petyr's mind the very face of the ladder itself. Now that's not all we have to go off of as far as Littlefinger's obsession with Catelyn is concerned, as there are a few more instances we can look to confirm that whatever love he may have had for her has long since been corrupted into something insidious. As an adult, Littlefinger orchestrates events that cause immense suffering to Catelyn and her family, including the execution of her husband, Ned Stark, and the capture and mistreatment of her daughters. And a truly loving person would not have endangered their loved one's family in such a way. While he did send a letter to Catelyn after Brandon Stark was excruciatingly burned to death by the Mad King, she burnt the letter without reading it, with the contents likely being an attempt to win her over again, rather than expressing true, genuine condolences after the death of her betrothed, showing us his unwillingness to take no for an answer, which extends to finding a replacement in Catelyn through Sansa after her death. After Catelyn's brutal murder at the Red Wedding, Littlefinger is never shown grieving or attempting to seek direct vengeance for her, suggesting her actual person was secondary to his goals. Additionally, his subsequent focus on Sansa Stark, who physically resembles her mother, is often cited as evidence that he wanted to possess a younger version of the woman he couldn't have, treating Sansa as a replacement rather than as an individual whom he loved. In short, Catelyn Tully was never just the woman Petyr Baelish loved. She was the mirror through which he defined his own worth and power. Her rejection did not destroy his love. It metastasized it into obsession, resentment, and ambition. She became the ghost he chased his entire life, and through her, he learned to mistake possession for affection, conquest for connection, and manipulation for intimacy. That delusion became the emotional foundation for all of his future evils. Additionally, when speaking on Littlefinger's decision to give Sansa over to the Boltons, where she was beaten, assaulted, and tortured by Ramsay for weeks on end, George R.R. Martin had this to say in James Hibbert's book, Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon, Game of Thrones, and the official untold story of the epic series. My Littlefinger would have never turned Sansa over to Ramsay. Never. He's obsessed with her. Half the time he thinks she's the daughter he never had, that he wishes he had if he'd married Catelyn. And half the time he thinks she is Catelyn, and he wants her for himself. He's not going to give her to somebody who would do bad things to her. That's going to be very different in the books. Now after the fight with Brandon, Petyr was allowed to recover at Riverrun for a fortnight, during which time Lysa, the woman who truly loved him, helped care for him. On the other hand, Catelyn refused to see him, and Petyr did not want to see Edmure, who had served as Brandon's squire during the duel, that additional source of resentment I mentioned earlier, which is further evidence of his resentment towards him. However, during this recovery process, he would have sex with Lysa again, later claiming to have taken the maidenhood of both Tully sisters due to his belief that his first encounter with Lysa had actually been with Catelyn. Not long after, Lysa and Catelyn would be married off by their father to Jon Arryn and Ned Stark respectively in a double wedding at Riverrun during Robert's Rebellion, securing an alliance between the Riverlands, the North, and the Vale. Catelyn moved to Winterfell after marrying Ned to live a happier life and to move past her depressive state following Brandon's death. Littlefinger would also leave Riverrun, though he did so under much worse circumstances. Following Lysa's consumption of moon tea, Lord Hoster banished Petyr from Riverrun, likely a combination of his humiliation against Brandon Stark and his family being too small and insignificant to marry into his house being the driving factors behind his decision. Despite his unhappy departure from his adopted home, Littlefinger wasn't going to let such an unfortunate occurrence lessen his chances at using the Tullys for his own ends. And though Catelyn was now out of reach and his relationship with Hoster strained, Lysa was more than ripe for the picking. Knowing Lysa was hopelessly in love with him even following her marriage to Jon Arryn, Littlefinger would use her one-sided affections for him as the catalyst for his rise to power. Behind the scenes, he was able to convince Lysa to persuade her husband to place Littlefinger in control of the customs office of Goldtown to make Lysa happy. The culture of Goldtown revolved around its status as the largest port city in the Vale, making trade, merchants, and the customs office integral to Goldtown's societal structure, and thus the Vale as a whole. Its strategic location meant it was a vital hub for exotic goods and supplied the Vale during winter, leading to a culture of commerce and the presence of fine seamstresses. Once there, Littlefinger quickly outperformed every other royal tax collector, bringing in revenue at triple their rate. Impressed by his results, Jon continued to promote him, which eventually led him to the capital, and within only 3 years of arriving there, Petyr had risen to the post of Master of Coin and secured a seat on the small council. As his authority grew, Littlefinger expanded his influence by quietly placing his own people into key administrative roles, from the keepers of the keys to harbor officials, toll collectors, and wine merchants. At the same time, he constructed an extremely intricate network of loans, investments, and financial dealings that ensured a constant flow of gold to the crown, even as it pushed the monarchy deeper into debt. He also purchased a number of businesses, most notably several brothels, catering to all kinds of clientele, including child lovers and those attracted to dead bodies, and amputees being a few examples. Places of business that served as both income sources and useful hubs for gathering information. Under his tenure, the crown's revenues skyrocketed compared to those of the previous Master of Coin, though Robert Baratheon's spending habits ensured that the kingdom remained heavily indebted. Petyr even sold certain posts, such as the position of chief jailer, to enrich himself further. And aside from his savvy in regard to forging relationships and manipulating people, this is the first chronological instance of Littlefinger's genius truly shining through. Littlefinger put the crown in debt to enrich himself and gain power by effectively creating a financial Ponzi scheme. He embezzled loyal income into private ventures, inflated or falsified expenses to hide his actions, and borrowed massive sums from lenders, such as the Iron Bank. This manufactured a mountain of debt that made him indispensable, because he alone understood the chaotic web of loans, payments, and missing money, allowing him to tighten his grip on the realm by presenting himself as the only man capable of managing its finances. With the royal treasury as his playground, he quietly funneled public funds into his own businesses, siphoning off profits into his personal fortune, and then strategically using a portion of that stolen wealth to pay down debts in a way that made it seem like he was performing financial miracles. This illusion of unmatched fiscal genius granted him immense influence, enabling him to bribe officials, place loyalists in key positions, and reward those who could help him advance his schemes. By engineering a debt crisis that left the Iron Throne dependent on foreign lenders, he made the crown fragile and easily manipulated, all the while positioning himself as the solution to problems he had secretly created. This instability allowed him to exploit desperate nobles, binding them to him through financial favors, arranged marriages, and wardships. Ultimately, Littlefinger's financial sabotage was a weapon aimed at the very foundation of Westerosi society. As a man born into a minor, mocked house, he sought to undermine the entrenched social order that had excluded him, using economic chaos to erode old hierarchies and carve out a path to power that he alone could walk in a world where birth and bloodline had once been the ultimate currency. During this period, Petyr also mingled freely at court. He famously wagered on Jaime Lannister at Joffrey's name day tourney and lost his Valyrian steel dagger to King Robert when Jaime was unexpectedly unhorsed. He also frequently boasted about having taken Catelyn Stark's virginity, a claim that was untrue but served his desire to craft a particular image of himself among the nobles, showing how little Lysa's assault on him meant as long as it served his own aims. Meanwhile, retainers like Oswell Kettleblack had long been in his employ, showing how deeply his personal network extended beyond the walls of the Red Keep. It should also be noted that House Kettleblack itself did not exist despite being known as a minor, distinct house of the realm. It was, in fact, a fabrication of Littlefinger, and it was comprised of untrustworthy sellswords, spies, and double agents of Littlefinger and the Lannisters to an extent, with their only loyalty being to whoever was the highest bidder, which further solidifies how intricate and detailed a planner he was. As time went on, life in the capital became increasingly difficult for Lysa Arryn, who had to share her home with her elderly husband, while the true object of her affections, her beloved Petyr, remained close by. Due to Petyr's emotional manipulation of her, she began imagining a new life with him, and according to the world of Ice and Fire, she even rekindled a secret relationship with him. When Lysa discovered that Jon Arryn planned to send their son Robert to Dragonstone to be fostered by Stannis Baratheon, Petyr gave her the poison she later used to kill her husband to prevent it, the Tears of Lys. He then persuaded her to send a letter to Catelyn, blaming the Lannisters for Jon's death, a lie that helped spark the chaos Petyr needed for his long-term plans, turning two prominent houses against each other in the process, all of which only further set the stage for Petyr's overall agenda. Now, while there are many things that occurred both before and during the overarching story of A Song of Ice and Fire that caused all the horrid things we witness occurring in it to play out, so it would be that Littlefinger became the one man that you could pin all of it on. For if Jon Arryn never perished, and Lysa never wrote that letter, Robert and his host would have never went north to recruit Ned for Hand of the King, Bran would have never gotten injured, and in all likelihood, Robert wouldn't have died when he did. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here, for there is much more to be said of Littlefinger and his actions, and to get a complete understanding of his character, let's run through the events of this story in both the books and the show, and highlight the similarities and differences between the two versions of his character. Throughout the first book and the first season of the TV show, there are some similarities in their character and scheming, but also some noticeable differences, and things both of them add to enhance our understanding of Littlefinger's character. Firstly, the way he's introduced differs quite a bit. In the books, we see him when Catelyn first arrives at King's Landing with Sir Rodrik Cassel, and despite her efforts to remain undetected, Littlefinger intercepts her and brings her to the Red Keep to give her information on the Cat's Paw assassin. In the books, it's strongly implied, if not accepted by most readers, that Prince Joffrey Baratheon was the one who tried to have Bran killed in an attempt to impress his father after he stated he ought to be mercy killed for his condition, stealing a Valyrian steel dagger that his father won from Littlefinger in this version of the story, and giving it to an assassin while not knowing its true worth. In the show, his first scene is with Eddard and the Small Council, doing a brief catch-up with him and telling the story of Brandon Scarry gave to him during their duel, where we get to see his general demeanor at work. His meeting with Catelyn and Rodrik occurs under similar circumstances, except instead of the Red Keep, he takes her to one of his brothels, where he tells her the blade that was used to kill Bran was one he lost to a bet to Tyrion Lannister. It's revealed later on in Season 7, before Littlefinger's death, that the blade belonged to him, and he orchestrated the assassination attempt on Bran to further exacerbate the tensions between the Starks and the Lannisters, framing Tyrion in the process and giving the Starks an enemy to blame. Regardless of the version, Littlefinger capitalizes on the already dire situation by lying about Tyrion's involvement, further putting all of the pieces into place for open war. Most of the events leading up to Ned's execution end up being the same. He takes Ned Stark to his brothel, where he keeps Catelyn, and in the show, Ned assaults Petyr because he thinks he's insulting him and his wife by taking them to the brothel and calling her a whore in this way, which is something you can't exactly blame Ned for, considering that sounds like something Littlefinger would do. Here is where Littlefinger agrees to help Catelyn and Ned uncover the truth regarding the murder of Jon Arryn and the assassination attempt against Bran, mostly due to his past affection for Cat, which Ned correctly deduces is still the case. He encourages Ned to investigate quietly after Pycelle informs him of Ned's possession of the lineages and histories of the great houses of Westeros, discovering that Cersei's children are incest products due to their blonde hair instead of the dark Baratheon hair they should have, and he chooses to play the role of a helpful advisor while slowly steering Ned toward danger, going so far as to tell him not to trust anyone, even Petyr, despite pointing out all of Cersei's, Varys's, and his own spies as they walk about the garden in the Red Keep, and pointing him in the direction of finding out the truth about Robert's bastards, and how Cersei's children have no legitimate claim to the throne by visiting Gendry and a bastard baby of Robert's that a prostitute, Megan, is the mother to, who works at his brothel. The hand's turn he plays out in a similar way, with some extra insights given in the show. Firstly, when he sits next to Sansa and Arya, he tells the latter about how he got his nickname, and tells the former the story of how the Hound got his scars at the hands of the Mountain after witnessing Gregor's brutality firsthand when he kills Sir Hugh during a jousting game, something that the Hound tells Sansa himself in the books, both of which encourage her not to spread the story around. In the books, when he encounters Sansa for the first time, he simply brushes her cheek and strokes her hair affectionately, hinting at his predatory nature. Additionally, after losing his bet to Renly Baratheon, he makes it clear that he knows about his secret relationship with Loras Tyrell, something that the show Littlefinger regularly does to let others know he has leverage against them and uses as a strategy to get his way. Lastly, when Sansa defends Sir Loras' honor after Littlefinger stated he won because he was crafty in his attack, he explains that honor can easily dissipate when enough gold is on the table. The first of many lessons he would try to impart on the young girl to further groom her to be his. Everything else remains almost the same, with some additions that add to Littlefinger's character here and there, like this exposition scene and his rivalry with Varys. His support for assassinating Daenerys when word gets out that she's pregnant with his child appears in both the book and the show, and the shock he displays when Ned orders the Mountain's execution and commands Tywin Lannister to arrive to court to answer for his raids on the Riverlands, which was done after Tyrion's arrest by Catelyn, remains consistent with Littlefinger's character, a byproduct of his scheming. Most importantly, in both mediums, Littlefinger ultimately betrays Ned in the throne room, having bribed the Goldcloaks to back Cersei instead after Ned attempted to recruit him as a player in his plan to crown Stannis king after he discovered the truth of Joffrey's birth, reminding him here that he warned Ned not to trust him. In both versions, he advocates political pragmatism, supporting Joffrey over Stannis when Ned tells him he'll try to install the latter after Robert is gravely injured in a hunting accident, attempting to steer Ned into a coup by proxy. In both versions as well, he knew Ned wouldn't agree to Joffrey ruling due to his rigid code of honor, and put him in a position where he could be executed or removed from the picture by the Lannisters, which happened on the orders of the unhinged and cruel Joffrey, further increasing the likelihood of an all-out war, which is something Ned tried to avoid by going through the proper legal channels. The show, however, dramatizes his duplicity more heavily. The essence of the arc, namely his deceit, his manipulation of Ned, and his pivotal betrayal, remain identical, but the show removes much of the ambiguity, making Season 1 Littlefinger a more transparent villain than his subtler book counterpart. In the books and show, following the arrest of Ned and his men being killed, Littlefinger continues playing the part of the loyal servant, this time to the Lannisters, and he takes Sansa's friend, Jane Poole, daughter of Vaon Poole, to use for future purposes. This part is exclusive to the books, which explains why she's a non-presence in the show. He also attends Ned's public confession of his crimes of acting against the rightful King Joffrey so he could take the throne and become a part of the Night's Watch instead, which unfortunately results in his execution by Joffrey and all-out war taking place. But as unfortunate as this war is for the realm, it's something quite fortunate for Littlefinger, as this was the culmination of all his plotting and scheming coming to fruition at once. And in the show, if you look from a distance, you can actually see Littlefinger grinning at Varys, showing full satisfaction that his gamble paid off, and that now the realm is in disarray at his hands, with war and chaos being an inevitability. Now we could go into individual detail and chronicle every atrocity that was committed and each loss of life or suffering that was caused during the War of Five Kings by some of the most notorious and brutal monsters in fiction as a result of Littlefinger's instigation of this war. But as I mentioned earlier, the simplest way to convey to you Littlefinger's role in all of this is to say that he is responsible for everything, despite his indirect role in the actual atrocities themselves. With a lot of well-placed scheming, assassinating Jon Arryn and making the Lannisters look responsible, attempting to assassinate Bran and framing it on Tyrion, pushing Ned towards taking action against Gregor and Tywin, and getting Ned arrested and executed, Littlefinger was purposefully nudging the Stark and Lannister tension towards armed conflict until it all erupted into the War of the Five Kings. The result? Tens of thousands dead or suffering. Littlefinger is aware of the damage he's caused, which makes him responsible for casualties and cruelties that can hardly be matched by any other character in the story, save for perhaps Euron Greyjoy. Additionally, what Littlefinger lacks in visceral and hands-on cruelty that characters like Aerys II, Roose Bolton, Ramsay Bolton, Joffrey Baratheon, and the Mountain get up to, can be made up for by an insanely high body count that makes him an incredibly dangerous and threatening individual who should never be taken lightly under any circumstances. And now, at this point in the story, with the War of Five Kings in play, the members of the nobility are no longer playing the Game of Thrones, but rather everyone is playing Littlefinger's game, and they're playing it by his rules. But it only gets worse as we continue following his story. Littlefinger's role in the second installment of this series has some similarities between each iteration, but it's greatly expanded upon in the show, and while Littlefinger's role is smaller in A Clash of Kings than in the show, it's still psychologically dense and reveals the foundation of his long-term strategy. In King's Landing, he continues tightening his grip over the realm's finances, quietly imposing new taxes and manipulating revenue streams in ways that make him indispensable to the crown. His understated presence mirrors the way he wields influence. never in the spotlight, but always at the center of the machinery that keeps the kingdom functioning, with the only one at this point who sees who Petyr is, being Tyrion Lannister, who quickly realizes that Littlefinger is far more dangerous than most believe, seeing through the facade of harmlessness that Petyr uses to shield himself. It's during this period of the story that Littlefinger suggests that the small council counter Stannis' accusation of Joffrey's illegitimacy with a rumor of their own, one about Shireen Baratheon being fathered by the Baratheon's fool Patchface, which further exposes his moral nihilism. For as far as Littlefinger is concerned, truth is irrelevant, and reputation is nothing but a tool to weaponize. He also boasts to Tyrion about sleeping with both Catelyn and Lysa, which reveals the fragile ego beneath the confident smiles he's so often wearing. Petyr needs others to believe the myth of his own desirability, as these lies reinforce the fantasy identity he has built to escape the humiliation of his youth and the insecurities he still holds as a result. While his manipulation of Lysa can be counted as one of the greatest examples of his genius, one of the most significant displays of his genius comes with his forging of the Tyrell-Lannister alliance once the War of the Five Kings has reached a turning point and Stannis is poised to take the throne. Traveling to Bitterbridge in Highgarden, Littlefinger reads the desires and fears of House Tyrell with predatory precision, securing an alliance that ultimately wins the Battle of the Blackwater. His reward, Harrenhal and the title of Lord Paramount of the Trident, marks the first monumental leap in his climb. These titles symbolize his growing ability to weaponize chaos, debt, and instability as tools to dismantle the aristocratic order that once pushed him aside, proving that chaos is more than an opportunity for him. It's his natural habitat. In Season 2, Littlefinger's role is greatly expanded upon, transforming him from the subtle, smiling bureaucrat of the books into a visible, predatory schemer whose ambition is immediately apparent, all of which amplifies his presence greatly. We see that he was the one responsible for allowing Ned Stark to send a letter to Stannis, letting him know about Jaime and Cersei's incestuous throne, and more importantly, how he has the most legitimate claim to the throne when compared to his younger brother Renly, and of course, Cersei's children. His scene with Cersei in King's Landing, where she remarks about his Mockingbird sigil coming a long way from his lowborn status, and his insinuation that he knows about her affair with her brother, are a demonstration of the bolder, more confrontational approach he has with people in the show versus the books, letting Cersei know that in the end, knowledge is power. However, she then reprimands him by commanding her men to cut his throat, before changing her mind and letting him go, telling him that power is power, a reminder to know his place, and that being as ambitious as he is cannot match being born into such a lofty position, proceeding to threaten him with death if he can't find the Stark girls, Arya and Sansa. Following the mass execution of Robert's bastards, including the infant he introduced Ned to in his brothel in Season 1, he confronts Raz, suffering from severe trauma and insomnia after witnessing such a horrific act. He responds in a particularly cruel and callous way, describing it as poorly handled, and in order to convince her to keep up her work and make him more money, he tells her a story of a prostitute from Lys that was very expensive, who wasn't making him any money, and that a very wealthy person was able to mitigate his financial losses by offering to transform her and use her in ways that wouldn't occur to most men. He shows a mild amount of empathy by allowing her to take the day off, but he expects her to continue her work without the same interruptions, holding this threat over her head, which unfortunately happens in Season 3 when he sells Raz off to Joffrey to be tortured to death, showing us how deeply apathetic and lacking in any moral scruples that this pathetic excuse for a man is. In his mind, people are instruments, not individuals, and it's a further reflection of his psychopathy. Additional scenes at Renly's camp, where he's greeted in an inhospitable manner by Renly himself, but offers to open the gates of King's Landing to his forces and betray the Lannisters, highlights Littlefinger's manipulative nature and his ability to play multiple sides simultaneously. He was hedging his bets and positioning himself to profit regardless of which side won. For so long as the war continued to rage and weaken the major players, Littlefinger didn't care who won in the end, for no matter who won, he would prove to be the true victor once the dust finally settled. His offer of open gates was designed to make Renly overconfident, or the Tyrells more likely to trust Baelish later on when he brokered the actual alliance with the Lannisters after Renly's death. Ultimately, Littlefinger wanted to ensure the existing power structures crumbled so he could build his own power base from the ruins, a plan that did not include Renly sitting securely on the Iron Throne. In a scene that is not shown in the books, Littlefinger is sent by Tyrion to propose a prisoner exchange between Sansa and Arya, who he claims are being kept in captivity and are healthy and safe, and when he arrives at his destination and speaks with Catelyn, his interaction with her is understandably hostile considering the role he played in getting Ned arrested and eventually executed. However, he still seems to cling to some hope here that fate will bridge them together like they were supposed to be in his mind. But after she pulls the knife on him, it's possible that he realized at that moment he couldn't win her back, and so that's when he decided to start focusing his affections on Sansa. As predicted, he was able to convince her to send Jaime back to King's Landing without Rob's permission, with the bones of Ned given to her as a gesture of good faith, seemingly swaying her. However, this does nothing to repair their relationship, despite the formidable manipulation and negotiation skills that Tyrion likely saw in him that would make such a proposal a success. He takes an immediate interest in Margaery Tyrell, subtly signaling that he knows her marriage to Renly is a political facade, demonstrating his habit of weaponizing other people's secrets to test their vulnerabilities. After Renly's sudden assassination, Littlefinger wastes no time pivoting, approaching the Tyrells to manipulate their grief and shock into a new alliance with Joffrey that will preserve Margaery's ambition and fuel Loras's desire for revenge. He then escorts them toward Highgarden, positioning himself as the architect of a new political order. His trip to Harrenhal to negotiate with Tywin is equally revealing. He glides into the Lion's Den without fear, presenting the Tyrell alliance as if he alone can solve the Lannisters' looming military catastrophe, all while Arya, now Tywin's cupbearer, hides her face, with Littlefinger studying her with a flicker of suspicion that shows how dangerous his perceptiveness truly is. His negotiations succeed, and the Tyrell Lannister army smash Stannis at Blackwater, granting Littlefinger an immense reward: lordship of Harrenhal and formal elevation into the upper nobility he has always resented from afar. But his rise does not soften him. He immediately arranges Joffrey's new betrothal to Margaery, freeing Sansa only on paper, after which he corners the girl to warn her that her supposed release is an illusion and that Joffrey will never truly let her go, an admission that serves both as a threat and as an invitation to depend on him instead. Across the season, Littlefinger uses death, fear, and social upheaval as tools. Every corpse, every broken alliance, every vulnerable young girl becomes an opportunity for him to tighten his grip on the societal collapse he is helping to orchestrate, revealing a man whose evil lies not in overt violence, but in the cold, parasitic exploitation of everyone else's tragedy. As we move into the third book in the third and fourth season of the show, we find that in the books, Littlefinger's arc during this corresponding period is far more calculated, subtler, and even more sinister. After warning Tywin of the Tyrell's plan to smuggle Sansa to Highgarden and marry her to Willis Tyrell, a character that only appears in the books, he earns Tywin's trust and receives permission to court Lysa Arryn, an opportunity he fully intends to exploit. Though he publicly leaves King's Landing, he secretly lingers nearby to monitor the political landscape until Joffrey's wedding, where he orchestrates the king's murder in partnership with Olenna Tyrell, using Sansa herself as the unwitting smuggler of the poison by hiding it in her hairnet. After Joffrey's collapse, Ser Dontos Hallard, another of Littlefinger's disposable pawns, ferries her to Littlefinger's ship, where Petyr immediately has the drunken fool executed to ensure silence, and to remind Sansa that every act of kindness that she has seen from him was part of his design. On the journey north, he reveals to her the depth of his manipulation. He arranged the dwarf joust to provoke Tyrion, used Dontos as a lure, and carefully planned every detail to frame the Lannisters for the assassination. At his keep in the Fingers, Littlefinger gives Sansa the false identity of Elaine Stone, and during Lysa's breakdown after she witnesses him kissing Sansa, who he remarks is a beautiful young woman who looks like her mother did at her age, or as he says in the show, "You're more beautiful than she ever was," which is something he says after telling her in a creepy manner that the world is unjust because Ned Stark ended up marrying Catelyn and having her as his child instead of Littlefinger. He reveals all of his scheming to Sansa: the murder of Jon Arryn, the forged letters that ignited the War of the Five Kings, and his plan to seize control of the Vale through his marriage to Lysa. Their marriage ends with Petyr pushing Lysa through the moon door after she threatens Sansa, delivering the icy revelation that the only woman he has ever loved is Cat, or as he says in the show, your sister, exposing the personal obsession he has with Catelyn as being at the core of his elaborate political ascent. Her reaction is slightly different in the books versus the show. As in the books, she is completely silent, as if all the life was sucked out of her before she hit the ground, whereas the show version is visibly shocked and screams as she plummets to her death. Now, as Lord Protector of the Vale, he now controls Sansa's identity, future, and safety, proving that in the books, he is not just a political manipulator, but a master predator who constructs entire wars, alliances, and identities as tools to fuel his rise and to possess whatever or whomever he desires. It's here in this moment as well where he reveals that his affections for Lysa, the love he had for his sweet silly wife, were nothing but a ruse so she would be a useful tool for his own ambitions, showing us his utter lack of morality and humanity and how he sees people as chess pieces easily disposed of for the sake of his ambitions. In this book, Lysa's death is blamed on the singer Marillion, whereas in the show, he places the blame on her, stating that she took her own life. In the show's third season, Littlefinger's arc centers on tightening his hold over Sansa, expanding his spy network, and eliminating anyone who threatens his long-term plans. He secretly employs Ser Dontos H'Larg as a pawn to win Sansa's trust, while the Kettleblack brothers, believed by Cersei and Tyrion to be loyal to them, actually serve Petyr alone, giving him unprecedented access to the royal family's inner workings. With his status elevated as Lord of Harrenhal, he prepares to leave the capital with a marriage proposal for Lysa Arryn, but he simultaneously schemes to take Sansa with him, correctly recognizing that she could become a more valuable political bride than Lysa. When Ros betrays him to Varys, he retaliates with chilling cruelty, handing her over to Joffrey to be murdered for the sake of proving that betrayal carries a terminal price. His ability to anticipate plots is clear when he tests Sansa after Olyvar seduces Loras Tyrell and uncovers the Tyrells' plan to marry her off. Realizing she has outside help, he alerts the Lannisters to destroy the Tyrell scheme. It's during his final confrontation with Varys, where he reveals Ros's murder and delivers his chaos is a ladder philosophy, and when his ship leaves the capital without Sansa, that she realizes she has lost the one opportunity she believed would free her. But Littlefinger's departure signals something far darker. He now has the nobility, mobility, and freedom to escalate his machinations on a broader stage. Littlefinger's Season 4 arc marks the moment where his villainy becomes blatant rather than theoretical, beginning with his orchestration of Joffrey's assassination and the immediate disposal of Dontos H'Larg, whom he casually murders the moment the man outlives his usefulness. As he sails away with Sansa, the one person he truly wants to possess and weaponize, he reveals the details of his plot to assassinate Joffrey to her in much the same way he does in the books. Upon reaching the Vale, he shifts into a different mode of predation, presenting Sansa as his niece, Elaine, while reactivating his toxic relationship with Lysa Arryn. Her confession that she poisoned Jon Arryn at his command demonstrates that Littlefinger engineered the event that triggered the entire series, confirming his long-term nihilistic philosophy and lifelong willingness to weaponize love, trust, and mental illness. This plays out in a similar way as in the books, with some small differences as we've already covered. He then shifts into survival mode, guiding Sansa through a performance that saves them both. Sansa lies flawlessly to the Vale Lords, revealing her identity and constructing a narrative that casts Lysa as unstable, while protecting Littlefinger. Her cold, calculating gaze afterward reveals a turning point. Littlefinger has awakened in Sansa the very skills he hoped to monopolize, helping to corrupt this once innocent young girl into a reflection of himself. Once he secures his acquittal, Littlefinger pivots again, manipulating the Vale Lords with a mixture of guilt, psychological pressure, and appeals to their honor, proposing they invest in young Robin's education and legitimizing himself as the de facto regent. His mentoring of Robin, teaching him not courage, but reliance, shows us how he molds weak figures into tools. The season ends with Sansa re-emerging in a new, dark gown, signaling her entry into the game. Littlefinger looks at her with pride, desire, and calculation, realizing she is becoming both his greatest creation and his greatest threat. By the end of Season 4, Littlefinger has poisoned kings, murdered a lifelong lover, destabilized kingdoms, trafficked Sansa out of the capital, manipulated the Vale into accepting him as protector, and begun shaping Sansa into a political weapon. He demonstrates his full moral emptiness. He kills without hesitation, lies without blinking, and adapts instantly to every shift in power, embodying a predator who disguises control as protection, and whose downfall will likely come from the very person he is grooming. When we move on to A Feast for Crows in the 5th season, we find Littlefinger consolidating power as Lord Protector of the Vale, using young, frail Robert Arryn as both shield and puppet. With Sansa disguised as Elaine, he stages a flawless cover-up by having her corroborate that Marillion killed Lysa, after which he secures Lord Nestor Royce's support by giving him the Gates of the Moon, a reward bought with lies, but packaged as Lysa's final wish. When the Vale's most powerful lords form the Lord's Declarant to depose him, Littlefinger plays for time. He pressures Cersei to officially forbid harm to him, manipulates a parley at the Gates of the Moon, and uses Sir Lyn Corbray, secretly on his payroll, to cause a dramatic outburst that breaches guest right. This orchestrated insult gives Petyr leverage to demand a full year to set the Vale to rights, buying him enough time to dismantle each enemy one by one. He publicly flatters the Declarants, privately plots to subvert them, and arranges political marriages, like wedding Lord Lionel Corbray to a merchant's daughter, to bind once hostile houses to him. He returns with 3 Hedge Knights, including Ser Shadrich, a sellsword secretly hunting Sansa for Varys, demonstrating his willingness to risk everything by surrounding her with men whose ambitions he believes he can outplay. As winter nears, he calmly explains to Sansa that Cersei's collapsing rule in King's Landing will plunge the realm into chaos sooner than expected, which he plans to exploit by engineering her marriage to Harold Harding, heir to Robert Arryn. Once Robert dies, a death he clearly anticipates and intends to hasten, and Tyrion is declared dead, Petyr will reveal Sansa as the rightful Stark heir and use the Knights of the Vale, now increasingly loyal or indebted to him, to conquer Winterfell in her name. He ends by kissing her again, underscoring his deepest pathology. Every scheme, every alliance, every murder ultimately serves his obsession with Catelyn, which has now been projected onto Sansa, and his hunger to control, possess, and reshape the world around that fantasy. Even far from King's Landing, his influence reverberates. Jaime Lannister notes that despite being granted Riverrun, Aemon Frey is technically Littlefinger's vassal, and Jaime even considers Petyr as a potential hand, revealing how completely Littlefinger has masked his villainy behind a facade of harmlessness. In A Feast for Crows, more than anywhere else, Littlefinger emerges not just as a schemer, but as a long-term architect of political transformation, a man who destroys feudal structures, corrupts institutions, and grooms vulnerable people, all to create a world where only his power and his twisted vision of love endures. During Season 5, Littlefinger escorts Sansa and Robin through the Vale under the guise of training the boy, maintaining his grip on Robin by assuring Lord Royce that strength is irrelevant when power is inherited. After receiving a raven, he quietly shifts their route and refuses to explain the detour, prompting Sansa's suspicions as they travel west. At an inn, Brienne confronts them, but Littlefinger undermines her credibility by highlighting her failed oaths to both Renly and Catelyn, framing her as a delusional knight chasing ghosts. When Brienne escapes, he presses forward with his true objective, delivering Sansa to Roose Bolton at Winterfell as Ramsay's bride, presenting the alliance as Sansa's opportunity for vengeance and a chance to reclaim her home. At Winterfell, Littlefinger subtly warns Ramsay not to harm her while negotiating with Roose about the validity of her marriage to Tyrion, deflecting Roose's doubts about his loyalties by recalling the Boltons' own betrayals. In the crypts, he recalls Rhaegar and Lyanna before announcing he must return to King's Landing, encouraging Sansa to trust either Stannis' likely invasion or her own ability to undermine the Boltons from within. Back in the capital, he discovers the Faith Militant has taken control, yet he confidently pushes past Lancel to meet Cersei, using the news of Sansa's marriage to provoke her anger and propose sending the Vale army north, after Stannis and the Boltons weaken each other, of course. In exchange for the future wardenship of the North, he promises to return that night for Tommen's official decree. Later, in his brothel, which has been destroyed by the Sparrows, Olenna confronts him and threatens to expose his role in Joffrey's murder, forcing him to retaliate by offering her the same type of weapon he gave Cersei, a beautiful young man, which is heavily implied to be Lancel, placing Olenna in a position to trigger Cersei's downfall. However, before we go any further, I'd like to emphasize again that George R.R. Martin himself clarifies what every reader instinctively knows. Book Littlefinger would never send Sansa into Ramsay Bolton's hands. His words are damning. My Littlefinger would have never turned Sansa over to Ramsay. Never. He's obsessed with her. This quote doesn't merely critique a plot choice, it exposes a psychological contradiction. Book Littlefinger's entire identity is built around two fantasies: Catelyn Stark, the woman he could never have, and Sansa Stark, the girl who symbolizes both the daughter he imagined and the woman he lost. To surrender Sansa to a man who would inevitably brutalize her is to destroy the fantasy he's been nurturing since she stepped off the boat in King's Landing. Book Littlefinger is many things: predatory, calculating, delusional, but he is not self-destructive, at least not to this extent. Show Littlefinger is. This deviation marks the point where the adaptation stops following the logic of the character and begins maneuvering him towards an endgame. His ultimate downfall is only possible because the show's version gives up the one thing book Littlefinger never does: control over Sansa Stark's fate. In the novels, Littlefinger keeps Sansa in the Vale under the alias Elaine, protected, hidden, groomed. It is not love, not in any healthy form. It is an obsession layered over unresolved childhood trauma. To Petyr, Sansa is simultaneously the ghost of Cat, the child he imagines he should have had, the key to the North, and the one person who gives meaning to his lifelong inferiority complex. He doesn't trust anyone else with her. Not the Lannisters, not the Boltons, not even Sansa herself. His control is complete because his fantasy demands it. To give her away would be to surrender the one dream that has been fueling him since boyhood. That is why George R.R. Martin's version of Littlefinger will never make the show's mistake. In A Dance with Dragons, Littlefinger's presence is mostly indirect, yet his influence continues to poison Westeros through the long-term consequences of earlier schemes. The most striking example is the girl presented as Arya Stark and married to Ramsay Bolton, a girl who was in fact Jane Poole, whom Littlefinger had secretly kept, beaten, and conditioned in one of his brothels before delivering her to the Lannisters as a political pawn. This act, trafficking and psychologically breaking a powerless young woman, all the while facilitating her marriage to one of the most disgusting human monsters in Westerosi history, once again highlights one of Petyr's darkest traits: his willingness to destroy innocent lives to generate chaos and reshape the political map for his own selfish gain. Here Cersei recalls that Petyr once begged to marry Sansa himself, a reminder of his obsession with the Tully girls and the grotesque blend of desire and ambition that motivates him. Meanwhile, King's Landing descends into fiscal ruin under Cersei, and even Sir Kevan Lannister privately wishes Littlefinger would return to manage the crown's finances, unaware that Petyr himself engineered the financial chaos that is now crippling the realm. In A Dance with Dragons, Petyr exists like a ghost in the narrative, rarely visible, but with his cruelty, lies, and machinations continuing to ripple outwards and destabilize kingdoms, destroy families, and weaponize vulnerable people for his own ascendance. Now this is where Petyr's story in the books ends, but if we take into account everything he accomplishes here, we can theorize some potential avenues he could take in The Winds of Winter or A Dream of Spring. If George R.R. Martin completes the series, Littlefinger's next moves will almost certainly revolve around elevating Sansa, Elaine Stone, into a political queen piece he can maneuver. His long-term plan rests on marrying her to Harold Harding, heir to the Vale, effectively giving him control over a region full of untouched knights who have not yet bled in the wars ravaging Westeros. By positioning Sansa to inherit the Vale and eventually reclaim Winterfell, Petyr aims to control both the Vale and the North through her, consolidating unprecedented power for a man of such low birth. This plan is only possible because Robert Arryn's death is inevitable due to his ill health. And while Petyr may not openly confess it, the subtext of the narrative strongly suggests he intends to accelerate the boy's decline. In his mind, shaping Sansa into his political instrument is the final phase of a lifelong climb to rule through proxy, placing his puppet atop kingdoms he could never rule directly. Despite his astonishing success up to this point, Littlefinger is positioned for a downfall born from the same qualities that raised him. In Martin's writing, characters who rely too heavily on deception ultimately become trapped in their own webs. Tywin, Cersei, Roose Bolton, and even the Tyrells fall victim to this narrative pattern. Littlefinger, who survives solely through lies layered upon lies, is heading towards the same fate. The Vale Lords already distrust him, tolerating his presence only because they lack proof strong enough to remove him. But Petyr's schemes are ballooning beyond his ability to control, and the more he manipulates powerful houses, falsifies identities, and hides his crimes, the more likely it becomes that a single mistake or a single betrayed ally will unravel everything. His overconfidence, born from years of never being caught, will eventually blind him to the moment when one lie too many finally collapses the structure he built. The most thematically fitting conclusion for Littlefinger's story is that Sansa Stark ultimately destroys him. George R.R. Martin is shaping her as a student of political manipulation, learning Littlefinger's tricks not because she admires him, but because she has no other way to survive. Petyr, blinded by his delusional projection of Catelyn onto Sansa, has grown careless. Improper touches, open confessions, and emotional entanglements are signs that he is losing his calculated distance. This makes him vulnerable in the exact way the narrative needs. The protege inevitably surpasses the mentor, and Sansa's increasing intelligence and emerging political instincts suggest she will eventually perceive the full horror of Petyr's schemes. Whether she exposes him to the Vale Lords, manipulates him into a fatal political situation, or personally engineers his death, Her agency in ending him completes her arc of transformation from a naive girl to a politically formidable woman. Another potential path to his downfall can be found in Petyr's trafficking, torture, and rebranding of Jeyne Poole into Arya Stark, one of the darkest crimes in the entire series, and one that cannot simply fade into the background. Once the Northern Lords learned that the girl forced to marry Ramsay Bolton was not Arya, but an abused pawn stolen from King's Landing, the political and moral fallout could be devastating. This act alone gives half the North a reason to demand his death. Theon knows the truth, Lord Manderley knows a piece of it, and Varys has always been capable of unearthing such secrets. George R.R. Martin rarely introduces such horrific violations without allowing consequences to blossom later in the narrative. When this truth emerges, and it will, the North's wrath, combined with veiled suspicion, could give Littlefinger's enemies the perfect moral justification to bring him down, turning his own cruelty into the weapon that destroys him. However, it could be someone he was largely incapable of manipulating that brings Petyr his ultimate end: Lord Varys. Littlefinger and Varys represent opposite worldviews: chaos versus order, self-interest versus collective stability, individual ambition versus structural preservation. Their rivalry is ideological, not personal, and once the Targaryen restoration gains momentum, Varys will no longer tolerate Petyr as a destabilizing force capable of sabotaging everything he has worked for. Varys' assassination of Kevan and Pycelle demonstrates his willingness to eliminate major political figures to secure his long-term plans. Petyr Baelish, whose existence threatens the stability Varys wants to re-establish under Aegon or Daenerys, becomes an obvious future target. Their final confrontation, direct or indirect, would likely manifest as a proxy war of spies, secrets, and assassins, with Varys' more disciplined and long-term strategy outclassing Littlefinger's reactive, opportunistic chaos-making. All that being said, Martin loves poetic justice. Tywin dies in shame, Joffrey dies choking on his own cruelty. For Littlefinger, the most fitting end would reflect the illusions he worships. A man who rose through lies would die because a lie finally fails him. A man who saw chaos would perish in the chaos of his own making. A man who built a persona on charm would be unmade by those who finally see through it. His death will likely be public and humiliating, stripped of control, stripped of narrative power, the one thing he has always clung to. Whether through Sansa's machinations, veiled justice, or the collapse of his own schemes, Petyr's story will end where it began: a low-born upstart whose climb ended not in triumph, but in a fall that exposes the emptiness at the core of his ambition. We'll revisit Littlefinger and his actions as they're portrayed in the books a bit later on, but now we've reached the point where all we know of his character is derived solely from the show. So let's move on and cover what we learn about him over the course of Season 6. In Season 6, Littlefinger arrives at Runestone to greet Robin Arryn and Yohn Royce, immediately manipulating the situation when Royce questions his deception about Sansa's route north. Baelish insinuates here that Royce leaked their travel plans to the Boltons, prompting Robin to consider executing Royce before Littlefinger theatrically advises mercy, securing Royce's obedience. He then reveals that Sansa has escaped Winterfell and is likely heading to Jon Snow for protection, prompting Robin to agree that they must send the Vale Knights to rescue her, formally ending the Vale's neutrality. Later, in Molestown, Sansa confronts him with a cold fury about Ramsay's abuse, demanding to know whether Littlefinger knowingly delivered her to a monster or was simply a fool. Shaken, he apologizes and offers the entire Vale army to her, but she rejects him and threatens his life, forcing him to retreat while slipping her the vital intelligence that Brynden Tully has retaken Riverrun. Eventually, when Sansa and Jon fail to secure enough northern support, she secretly sends a letter to Littlefinger, and he arrives with the Knights of the Vale moments before the Stark forces are annihilated, crushing the Boltons and enabling House Stark to reclaim Winterfell. In the aftermath, Littlefinger corners Sansa in the Godswood, and he finally admits his long-held ambition to sit on the Iron Throne with her as his queen, immediately pivoting to undermine Jon by calling him a motherless bastard. But Sansa refuses his advances. When the Northern Lords unexpectedly proclaim Jon king in the north, Littlefinger remains the only figure in the hall who does not cheer, watching instead with a mix of envy, dread, and dawning realization that the future he imagined is slipping out of his control. In Season 7, Littlefinger watches Jon restore control of the Umber and Karstark lands to the children of the traitorous houses, quietly studying Sansa's reactions before approaching her to ask if she is truly safe and happy under Jon's leadership. When she brushes him off, Brienne interrupts and reinforces the barrier between them. He later finds Jon in the crypts, and he attempts to ingratiate himself, claiming credit for Jon's survival during the Battle of the Bastards. but Jon violently rejects him when Littlefinger confesses his love for Sansa. After Jon leaves for Dragonstone, Littlefinger advises Sansa on Winterfell's preparations for winter and urges her to imagine every possible threat, especially Cersei, before Bran returns, unnerving Littlefinger by repeating his own phrase, "Chaos is a ladder." Littlefinger then attempts to destabilize the Starks by orchestrating Arya's discovery of Sansa's old letter to Robb, which he illicitly obtains through Maester Wolkan and ensures Arya will find it by letting her spy on him while pretending not to notice. As the tension between Arya and Sansa rises, Littlefinger subtly inflames Sansa's fears, manipulating her concerns about Arya's skills as a faceless assassin and reminding her that Brienne is sworn to protect her from any threat, including Arya. But when Sansa consults Bran, his visions expose Littlefinger's entire history of deceit: the murder of Jon Arryn, the dagger meant to kill Bran, the betrayal of Ned Stark, and his ongoing attempts to divide the sisters. During Arya's staged trial, Littlefinger is blindsided when Sansa turns the accusations onto him, publicly detailing his crimes. Cornered without allies, he attempts lies, authority, pleas for privacy, and finally, emotional begging, claiming he has only ever protected Sansa, but she coldly rejects each appeal. It's then that Arya slits his throat with the Valyrian steel dagger he once used to start the War of the Five Kings, and Littlefinger dies on the floor of Winterfell, his voice drowning in the blood spilled by the chaos he once manipulated so effortlessly. And so it was that one of the smartest guys in Westeros was thwarted by the efforts of 3 kids. Pretty cool, right? Well, now that we've reached this point in the video, and we've examined in depth all the horrors unleashed by Littlefinger, let's now consolidate all we've learned and truly dial in the evil of his character. As we covered earlier, his childhood and the circumstances of his birth had a great impact in forging Littlefinger into the monster he became. Feeling as if his entire world was the small tower of his birth accentuates the notion that Petyr felt a sense of confinement and imprisonment based on the circumstances, class, and location he was born into, which was not something he actively chose, a veritable prison sentence imposed upon him at birth that he wanted more than anything to be free of. The gold-stained rocks make it even bleaker. Barren, desolate, constantly battered by the elements. It's not just a physical description of the fingers. It's a metaphor for Baelish's insignificance in the eyes of others. In Westerosi society, things are rigidly hierarchical and aristocratic, only favoring those of higher status and power. It taught Petyr that the rules of honor, morality, and class only serve those who already have power. He learned early that nobility is just a story the powerful tell themselves to justify why they're on top, a social construct rather than a reflection of inherent worth or morality. We get this from his famous speech to Varys, which was actually a creation of the TV show, but something that still explains his philosophy quite well, regardless of the version. The Realm. Do you know what the Realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies, a story we agree to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie. But what do we have left once we abandon the lie? Chaos, a gaping pit waiting to swallow us all, replies Varys. Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder. Many who try to climb it fail, never get to try again. The fall breaks them. And some are given the chance to climb, but they refuse. They cling to the realm, or the gods, or love. Illusions. Only the ladder is real. The climb is all there is. So when he says that his world was confined to a tower on a desolate coast, it tells us how he internalized a Darwinian worldview. Those at the bottom, like himself, are trapped by systems they didn't build, all while those at the top stay there by manipulating others into believing those systems are moral. It's key to mention, though, that, quite frankly, Littlefinger doesn't give a flying fuck about any of the downtrodden and poor in Westeros other than himself, seeing himself more so as the most unfortunate lord, rather than a fortunate person, as I explained earlier. And considering that's something he never really was, and is the furthest thing from at the present moment in the books, and at the time of his death considering the wealth and connections he built as Master of Coin, it makes sense that such an envious, cynical, and self-centered boy wouldn't have cared at all for those around him, even more so as he grew into an adult. Despite how integral Littlefinger's past is to his character, there is a quote that Littlefinger utters to Olenna Tyrell in his vandalized brothel in the 5th season of the show, one that explains why he views past events, even if they would be viewed as significant or traumatizing to the average person, as blips on the radar for him. The past is the past. The future is all that's worth discussing. This forward-thinking mindset is something that defines Littlefinger's character. A person who truly thinks nothing of the past as long as it serves as a reminder for how far he's come in the world, and as an incentive to keep on going to obtain his ultimate goal/desire, which is, as he puts it, everything. From this foundation, he developed a relativistic and cynical level of morality, or perhaps more appropriately, a lack thereof, considering how much of a repugnant creature he is. In his eyes, every virtue, honor, loyalty, love, is a tool to be weaponized or feigned, something that originates almost entirely from his environment, which shaped him into the man that we see in this story. Additionally, during his meeting with Tywin in Harrenhal, he states, "It is my belief that a moment of chaos affords opportunities, lost soon after. Where others see danger, he sees mobility. Where others see instability, he sees possibility." He sees himself as a man different from the rest of the nobles of Westeros, or even everyone else in Westeros, which is a component of his narcissism. The system as it is was not built for a man of his station, and therefore only chaos can level the playing field. Furthermore, his attitude that chaos is a ladder evokes the foundation of Littlefinger's entire playbook. For every little thing in this chaotic world he believes in becomes a rung on that ladder. Every word spoken, every move made, every relationship forged, all are merely tools born from chaos whom the right architect can use to create for himself anything he wishes. This is why Littlefinger intentionally engineers instability in Westeros. Wars, betrayals, assassinations, economic disruptions. Every crack in the realm's foundation is a foothold for him. Petyr understands that chaos destroys most people. To put it simply, he believes he's smarter than all of them. This seems to reveal the type of narcissism that he has. He thinks he alone has the will to climb. He believes he alone has the cleverness to survive. And he believes he alone is not beholden to illusions. It's not just ambition, it's supremacy of intellect. He sees himself as uniquely suited for the game he's creating. If we look deeper into Littlefinger's speech on chaos, the three pillars he identifies, the realm, the gods, and love, are the foundations of Westerosi society. The realm represents politics, duty, and order, which Ned Stark clings to and dies for. The gods embody religion, morality, and destiny, all of which ultimately fail Stannis. Love encompasses relationships, loyalty, and human connection, and those who rely on it, like Catelyn, Lysa, Sansa, Jon, and Robb, all suffer because of it. Petyr dismisses each of these as illusions that bind weaker men, tools used to manipulate and control the masses. His upbringing helps explain this worldview. As a boy in the Fingers, he had no realm to protect him. His Braavosi ancestry instilled little faith in gods, and his hopeless, unrequited love for Catelyn shattered love as a meaningful guiding principle. Having lost belief in all three pillars, only ambition remains real to him. Littlefinger's final line in his speech, "Only the ladder is real, the climb is all there is," distills his entire worldview into a single philosophy. Nothing matters except the chance to rise. He rejects honor, family, gods, nation, and even love as illusions that trap weaker men. What remains is the climb itself, the relentless pursuit of power. This is pure moral nihilism, a belief that the world has no inherent order, meaning, or moral truth. In such a meaningless world, Petyr believes the only rational objective is personal ascent, the exercise of individual will to seize every opportunity, no matter the cost. To a certain extent, we can sympathize with the young boy born in such a cruel, harsh world, as no one has a choice in where they're born, and you can largely blame the environment he was raised in for playing a big role in shaping his insecurities, moral psychology, or lack thereof, and his desire to prove his worth to those who looked upon him wrong. You could also make a stretch of an argument that Littlefinger's true tragedy is that he is incapable of love, satisfaction, or rest. He climbs not to reach anything meaningful, but to avoid confronting the emptiness within himself. Power is not a means to an end for him, it's his entire identity. Unlike Varys, who seeks stability in a better realm, Petyr has no endgame and no vision beyond perpetual ascent. He needs chaos because it allows him to keep climbing, and for him, freedom is not ruling, but endlessly rising. And in a way, you could argue that Littlefinger genuinely believes himself to be an everyman who's trying to make his way through a harsh world, an individual no different from his other family members who came from humble beginnings. Cersei's comment about his self-created mockingbird sigil proves this. Appropriate for a self-made man with so many songs to sing. "I'm glad you like it," replies Petyr. "Some people are fortunate enough to be born into the right family. Others have to find their own way." The consistent posturing he makes in this regard is probably one of the main reasons why he was able to get so far in this story regardless of the version of his character, because he was able to convince everyone of the story of a poor, downtrodden boy who was just trying to make it in this world. Everyone loves an underdog, and that's partly why he's been able to win people's affection so well, not just in the story, but with viewers and readers alike. On some level, there's something to resonate with when you see a person distinguishing themselves from the rest of the elites and promising to tear down existing power structures. A story that people are susceptible to being won over by, because at least they're different. At least they're trying to make a change. At least they can connect with the average person on some level. By selling these stories, so many people who don't have your best interest in mind can use this to shift the narrative in their favor and gain many followers and servants. And with their words alone, they can make them do anything for them, even if they have to kill their own mother or husband, and convince them it was for the greater good, which is part of what makes Littlefinger one of the most dangerous characters in this story. However, nothing, and I mean nothing, regardless of your station in life, justifies the actions one is willing to take that result in the deaths of thousands, if not tens of thousands of people, amongst a sea of other crimes, and ravaging a continent for the sake of self-advancement and an endless drive for power and revenge, which is exactly what Littlefinger embodies. If we go beyond these pillars of his character and the aspects of his childhood that created them, we find a lot more to work with as far as understanding Littlefinger's character goes. To start with an aspect of his personality, Littlefinger is, without a doubt, a genius. In a world filled with characters reliant on brute strength or magical prophecy, Littlefinger stands tall amongst the rest of the characters in terms of sheer, extraordinary intellect, with the possible exception of Varys, showing that he has a keen level of financial brilliance, psychological insight, and strategic foresight that make him one of the greatest planners and manipulators in fictional history, one that grants him the ability to manipulate individuals and institutions alike with incredible ease. In the books, he masterminds the Crown's massive debt crisis by intentionally entangling the Iron Throne in loans from the Iron Bank and other various lenders, creating a political environment where everyone unknowingly depends on him. He engineers Lysa Arryn's murder of Jon Arryn, frames the Lannisters, incites Ned Stark's downfall, and subtly maneuvers himself into rulership of the Vale and lordship over Harrenhal. In the show, his intelligence is more improvisational, but it's still impressive. He weaponizes information, exploits Cersei's paranoia, manipulates the Tyrells and the Boltons, plants seeds into Lancel Lannister's head to bring about Cersei's downfall, and successfully inserts the Knights of the Vale at the exact moment that will elevate his influence, whether it be by offering his services to Cersei against Stannis or Roose, or Sansa Stark in her move to take back Winterfell from Ramsay. His genius lies in his ability to see 3, 5, or 10 moves ahead, not through brute force or magical prophecy, but through a preternatural understanding of human desires, fears, and weaknesses. Whether in the courts of all the various lords of Westeros, or the shadows of the Vale, Littlefinger's intellect is the engine that drives his rise from a minor coastal nobody to one of the most dangerous power players in the realm. However, it's not just his traits that give Petyr the advantage, but his appearance, mannerisms, and way of speaking as well. In the books, this is what is said about his physical appearance during one of Kat's POV chapters when she interacts with Littlefinger in King's Landing. He looked contrite. The look brought back vivid memories for Catelyn. He had been a sly child, but after his mischiefs, he always looked contrite. It was a gift he had. The years had not changed him much. Petyr had been a small boy, and he had grown into a small man, an inch or two shorter than Catelyn, slender and quick, with a sharp feature she remembered and the same laughing gray-green eyes. He had a little pointed chin beard now, and threads of silver in his dark hair, though he was still shy of 30. They went well with the silver mockingbird that fastened his cloak. Even as a child, he had always loved his silver. Aidan Gillen's performance as Littlefinger is similar in a lot of ways, with some minor differences here and there. In the show, he is depicted as a man around average height, as Aidan Gillen, according to most sources, is around 5'8" or 5'9", which contrasts the book's description of a man of short stature. He retains his sharp, clean-cut, and refined features, with dark hair and threads of silver being prominent on the sides of his head. Instead of a chin beard, he has a stubbly goatee. His laughing green eyes don't seem to be present, as a key difference between the book Littlefinger and show Littlefinger is that the latter doesn't hide his insincerity as well, coming across as a slimy, creepy, untrustworthy little worm by comparison, whose schemes aren't as believable or vague, whereas book Littlefinger is able to deceive others well with his charming, amiable, and dependable personality, at least on a superficial level. He plays the role of the unthreatening financial administrator so convincingly that even the most powerful men in Westeros trust him implicitly. His apparent smallness in stature, behavior, and demeanor become weapons. There's also some key differences between the two based on how they dress. For starters, the book version is almost always dressed in some ornate clothing, showing that despite coming from low birth, he intentionally wears flashy clothing to fit in with the higher nobles of Westeros. A calculated effort made to ensure that those around him trust him more easily, often wearing shades of rose, plum, and blue with puff sleeves, doublets in cream and silver, and elaborate patterns like black and white stripes or mockingbirds on his cloaks. Additionally, the books often describe his clothing as being made of rich materials like velvet and silk, favoring well-tailored doublets, tunics, and cloaks that display his status and personality. The show adaptation presents a more uniform and subtle look for Littlefinger, which became darker as the series progressed, mirroring his overtly creepy and menacing portrayal in the show. The show primarily dresses him in dark, muted colors, like charcoal, gray, and black. His signature outfit is a long and dark mid-thigh length coat with a Nehru collar, which is sometimes described as resembling a formal Indian sherwani. The overall effect in the show is less colorful and more severe than in the books, making him appear more serious and less friendly to the audience from the start. The difference in costume design reflects a general contrast in character portrayal. The book version is more effective at concealing his intentions by appearing harmless and friendly, while the show makes his villainous nature more apparent from the beginning. But one of the most striking differences between the book and show versions of Littlefinger is his voice. In the novels, Petyr's speech is light, humorous, and disarming, the tone of a man who wants to appear harmless and approachable. His wit is playful, his charm is effortless, and his cadence is that of someone constantly diffusing tension. By contrast, Aidan Gillen's Littlefinger speaks in a slow, rasping whisper, stretching vowels and pausing theatrically. This creates an aura of menace rather than warmth, instantly signaling to the audience and the characters around him that he is someone to be wary of. The result is that show Littlefinger radiates suspicion, whereas book Littlefinger thrives because no one suspects him. Littlefinger's body language further separates the book and show portrayals. In the novels, he moves with ease and friendliness, smiling readily and gesturing openly. He enters conversations casually and comfortably, giving us the impression that he's a man who's at home in every social setting. This subtle physical confidence is part of how he draws people in. In the show, however, his posture is more predatory. He stands too close, tilts his head in serpentine angles, and hovers in shadows like a man who's always plotting. His presence becomes eerie rather than endearing, which fundamentally alters how other characters respond to him and erases the subtlety that defines him in the books. Both versions maintain the idea that Littlefinger's eyes betray some lingering mischievousness from childhood, but they express it differently. In the novels, Catelyn emphasizes his laughing green eyes, which make him seem friendly, approachable, and harmless, a man whose expressions encourages people to underestimate him. Sansa notes in A Game of Thrones that when Petyr laughs, his eyes don't, highlighting his insincerity and that every interaction with Littlefinger is a performance to get his way with people. The show replaces this with narrowed, scheming eyes and a tight, predatory smirk. One of the most defining features of book Littlefinger that rarely translates into the show is his sense of humor. He's genuinely funny in the novels, quick with banter, fond of teasing, and capable of lightening a room with his charm. This warmth, though superficial, helps him disarm people and gain their trust. It's central to his ability to operate undetected in political circles. The show version, however, rarely jokes and seldom projects warmth, though there are some exceptions, like when he remarks on Barristan Selmy being a naked knight after being kicked out of the Kingsguard by Joffrey and throwing his armor to the floor, or when he tells Joffrey he'll have to acquire some sons and grandsons after being granted Harrenhal, replacing wit with cryptic one-liners and ominous pronouncements. He still manages to be a deceptive and cunning character in the show, but as George R.R. Martin noted in a 2013 documentary on Niccolo Machiavelli, book Littlefinger and television show Littlefinger are very different characters. They're probably the character that's most different from the book to the television show, Martin said. There was a line in a recent episode of the show where he's not even present, but two people are talking about him, and someone says, "Well, no one trusts Littlefinger, and Littlefinger has no friends." And that's true of the television show Littlefinger, but it's certainly not true of the book Littlefinger. Book Littlefinger, everybody trusts him, and everybody trusts him because he seems powerless, and he's very friendly, and he's very helpful. He helps Ned Stark when he comes to town. He helps Tyrion. He helps the Lannisters. He's always ready to help, to raise money. He helps Robert. Robert depends on him to finance all of his banquets and tournaments and his other follies. And that's because Littlefinger can always raise money. So, he's everybody's friend. But of course, there's the Machiavellian thing. He's, everybody trusts him. Everybody depends on him. He's not a threat. He's just this helpful, funny guy who you can call upon to do whatever you want and to raise money, and he ingratiates himself with people and rises higher and higher as a result. Now in the show, almost every interaction Littlefinger has with a character, whether it be with Catelyn in Season 2 after being sent by Tyrion to negotiate with the Starks for Jaime's release, Renly Baratheon's jabs at Littlefinger's appearance, where he says, "I don't like you, Lord Baelish. I don't like your face. I don't like the words that come oozing out of your mouth," or his conversation with Olenna in Season 5 in his vandalized brothel, are all met with hostility, with little to no politeness and pleasantries coming from the people Littlefinger is talking to. Even his conversation with Cersei in Season 5, where he remarks that Lysa was a good woman, a kind woman, is immediately brushed off by Cersei as an insincere attempt to appear in mourning for her after she made a jab about her unpleasant and repellent character. This general attitude the characters have towards Littlefinger in the show can be attributed to how much of a notorious, self-serving opportunist he is. A man who betrays nearly everyone he comes across or makes a deal with at some point or another, such as Ned Stark, Lysa Arryn, and Sansa Stark specifically in the TV show, when he sold her off to the Boltons. This was seemingly done to legitimize their claim to the North, with the last Stark heir being brought into the fold following the Red Wedding and the supposed murders of Rickon and Bran at the hands of Theon Greyjoy. With House Bolton having betrayed House Lannister with this move, despite Roose Bolton being named Warden of the North by the grace of Lord Tywin, and helping the Lannisters bring about the end of House Stark's rule in the North by orchestrating and executing the Red Wedding. This pushes Cersei into taking Littlefinger's advice to let Stannis and the Boltons battle it out until one of the traitors to House Lannister is victorious, which would take place before sending the Knights of the Vale to reclaim the North, and more specifically, Winterfell. This positioned Littlefinger so that he'd be named Warden of the North following his orchestration of House Lannister turning against House Bolton, still succeeding in his ability to persuade someone who knows he's full of shit into playing a part in his power grab. After all, in this scenario, the only thing Cersei would have to lose is a brothel keeper, as stated in his words. This highlights several key differences between Littlefinger across the different versions of his character. In the books, he's demonstrated as being a much more calculated and charismatic manipulator, hiding his intentions well behind a jovial, well-mannered, and charming demeanor that entices powerful people into trusting and depending on him. He's much more subtle, long-term, patient, and cunning in this way, hiding his desires so well that even some fans and readers have trouble discerning what his actual goals are. The show is less subtle in its depiction of Littlefinger's goals and his ability as a manipulator, portraying him as being more short-term, adaptable, reactionary, and confrontational, which is likely why he's largely friendless and distrusted by most characters in the show, despite their willingness to go along with his schemes because it benefits them in some way, and not because they genuinely like, trust, or resonate with him. The books make it clear that Littlefinger is the type who has a plan, for every plan, for every plan, for every plan. His schemes are sprawling, interconnected, and deeply patient, such as destabilizing the realm through the crown's finances, his slow grooming of Sansa, and manipulation of the Vale, which are things that the show version shares, but in a much less subtle way, a skill which he demonstrates quite well in the later books. In the show, while he is still a calculated genius to an extent, it manifests differently, with a lot of his plotting and planning either being cut or abandoned, or being way out in the open where all ambiguity and subtlety is erased, especially everything regarding Sansa, which was likely done to make his goals clearer to the viewer, considering how well he hides it in the novels. It's also worth mentioning that Littlefinger is, without a doubt, a high-functioning psychopath. someone whose emotional range is profoundly shallow, but whose ability to simulate emotion is exceptionally refined. He does not experience love, empathy, guilt, loyalty, or remorse in a meaningful way. Instead, he studies these emotions in others and deploys convincing imitations of them whenever it helps him gain trust or advance his position. This is why his affection for Catelyn is better understood as fixation and wounded pride rather than genuine love, and why his paternal manner toward Sansa is merely a strategic performance. In Littlefinger's worldview, relationships are transactional, human beings are tools, and emotional bonds are weaknesses to exploit rather than connections to cherish. His psychopathy reveals the core of his morality, a complete internal emptiness that he fills with ambition, manipulation, and the ceaseless pursuit of power. The lack of real emotional depth is what allows him to orchestrate betrayals, political collapses, and even murders with absolute coldness, believing wholeheartedly that other people exist only to climb over. Now, one thing the show did better as far as Littlefinger's character goes is showing us further the relationship between him and Varys, something that's more muted in the books since neither of them are POV characters, and we don't have a clear idea of how they think of each other. Though one can assume they don't think positively of each other, considering the negative and catty comments they regularly make about one another there. However, the show's depiction of their relationship gives us more to chew on when trying to understand who Littlefinger is. They seem to be aware of each other as fellow schemers and players of the same game, but they're not active rivals that are trying to frustrate each other's schemes or one-up the other by revealing their secrets as friends, which is something we see when Littlefinger lets Varys know about his affiliation with a certain foreign dignitary, that being Illyrio Mopatis, and threatens to let the king know about where his loyalty truly lies, following Varys' threat that he would spill the beans to the Lannisters about Littlefinger's assistance of Ned Stark in his investigation. Additionally, in the books, Varys is not involved at all in the plot to marry Sansa Dolores and take her to Highgarden, where Littlefinger intervenes to prevent this from happening to further assist the Lannisters and his own plans for her, as Marjorie and Olenna orchestrate this themselves. However, in the show, Littlefinger's relationship with Varys is a quiet, razor-sharp cold war between two men who understand one another more deeply than anyone else in King's Landing. They are the only players who see the full board who recognize that the other is playing a long, subtle game beneath the surface of court politics. While they exchange polite smiles, soft jabs, and witty barbs, the truth is that they're constantly studying each other, testing boundaries, mapping weaknesses, and anticipating the other's next move. Their conversations are performances. Each pretends to underestimate the other while signaling, just under the surface, that they know exactly how dangerous the other is. From Littlefinger's perspective, Varys is an irritating but unavoidable obstacle, someone who cannot be bought, seduced, or intimidated. He sees Varys as a rival who has advantages he cannot easily replicate: a spy network, patience, and a belief in something larger than himself. This infuriates Petyr, because men with ideals cannot be controlled in the way he controls greedy, lustful, or ambitious lords. He also despises Varys' enigmatic nature. He hates that Varys always seems to know more than he does. In Petyr's mind, Varys is a competing master manipulator who must be outplayed or destroyed, someone who represents a worldview he rejects: stability, unity, and service to the realm. Littlefinger believes Varys is delusional for caring about the common people, viewing that as a weakness, whereas Varys sees Petyr's nihilism as a threat to millions. But what makes their dynamic so compelling is that they're mirror opposites. Both are brilliant low-born upstarts who reinvented themselves, but Varys uses his intelligence to preserve order, while Littlefinger uses his to create chaos. Varys is terrified of Littlefinger's ambitions because he sees how far Petyr is willing to go, collapsing economies, instigating war, all for personal gain. Meanwhile, Littlefinger respects Varys' cunning, but ultimately views him as an opponent to be outmaneuvered, a man too soft-hearted and sentimental to win the game. In the end, Varys acts as a moral counterweight that highlights Littlefinger's amorality. He is the only character Petyr cannot fully charm, deceive, or anticipate, and thus he's the one character he quietly hates the most. This is one of the most revealing dynamics in the entire series, as it places him in direct opposition to the only other character who plays the Game of Thrones with comparable subtlety and intelligence. Yet unlike Petyr, Varys has a clear, if ruthless, guiding philosophy: the good of the realm. Petyr, by contrast, has no ideology, no loyalty, and no higher purpose beyond himself. This contrast exposes the moral void at the core of Littlefinger's character. Varys believes in stability. Whether the viewer trusts him or not, Varys' actions are remarkably consistent. He prevents war where he can, promotes competent rulers, and removes those who threaten the safety of the common people. His methods are dark: espionage, manipulation, assassination, but they are always deployed toward a collective good. Furthermore, Varys claims he does everything for the good of the realm and for the well-being of the small folk. He views the pursuit of personal power without regard for the consequences as a dangerous game that leads to chaos and suffering. Littlefinger's methods look similar on the surface, but his motivations are diametrically opposed. Every choice he makes is designed to increase chaos, precisely because chaos is the environment in which he can climb. There is no family, no people, no realm that Littlefinger is doing this all for. The only thing that matters to him in the grand scheme of things is himself and personal ascent. Their famous confrontation in the throne room, Chaos versus the Realm, is the clearest moral contrast in the series. Varys defends the illusion of order because people need it to survive, while Petyr defends chaos because it gives him an advantage. Varys serves the realm, while Petyr serves nothing and no one but his own ego. This ideological clash reveals Petyr's underlying evil. He is perfectly willing to plunge Westeros into unending bloodshed, war, and famine if it means he can advance a single rung on his invisible ladder. The War of the Five Kings, one of the deadliest conflicts in the history of Westeros, is in large part a consequence of his machinations, especially his roles in framing Tyrion, manipulating Lysa to kill Jon Arryn, and pushing the Starks and Lannisters toward mutual destruction. Varys manipulates to preserve an already fragile world. Petyr manipulates to burn that world down. Two quotes from Varys reflect this. "A man with great ambition and no morals. I wouldn't bet against you." And, "Actually, I rather enjoy him, but he would see this country burn if he could be king of the ashes." Another key difference can be found in how they gather information. Varys builds networks through trust, protection, and fear of the larger consequences. Littlefinger's networks rely on seduction, blackmail, transactional relationships, and exploiting the weaknesses of others. Varys collects secrets to maintain stability. Petyr collects secrets to destroy. Ultimately, their rival is a study in competing forms of power. Varys is a pragmatic, utilitarian villain, whereas Littlefinger is a nihilistic, opportunistic villain. And this is why Petyr's evil is uniquely dangerous. Varys has limits. Littlefinger does not. Varys will not burn down a kingdom if it harms the people he claims to protect. Petyr will burn down that same kingdom so long as it gives him a vantage point to watch the flames. Their relationship, tense, wary, and rooted in mutual recognition, makes it clear that Littlefinger is the more unpredictable, more self-serving, and ultimately more catastrophic force. His lack of ideology makes him the purest embodiment of evil for ambition's sake in the entire narrative. Now that we've gotten a handle on who Petyr is as a person though, let's do an overview of his crimes in both the books and the show before we conclude this video, starting with the books. Despite coming from one of the weakest noble houses in Westeros, Littlefinger enters the story already wealthy, powerful, respected, and entrenched in the highest levels of government. While we can sympathize with him to a certain degree because of his station in life as we talked about earlier, his supposedly tragic youth is centered around unrequited love for Catelyn Tully, and at the end of the day, it doesn't allow us to give him much, if any, sympathy. While he was indeed humiliated when Catelyn rejected him, got himself nearly killed challenging Brandon Stark, and was then assaulted by a drunken Lysa who impersonated Catelyn, none of this manifests as a source of trauma in adulthood. He openly brags for years, falsely, that he took Catelyn's virginity, proudly recounting the story to Tyrion, members of the Small Council, and even Sansa, showing he sees it not as a violation, but a badge of masculine pride. Even the handful of painful events from his youth, whether the duel, the rejection, or being sent away from Riverrun, have no bearing on his later villainy. By the time the narrative begins, Petyr runs multiple financial and criminal enterprises, is beloved by nobles who underestimate him, and has risen to become master of coin. In a sense, he already proved everyone who previously sneered at him wrong, but he's too self-centered and narcissistic to want anything but more. In the end, his crimes stem not from trauma, but from appetite, ambition, greed, cruelty, and a desire to watch the realm burn in a chaos he can control. and Littlefinger's list of atrocities is staggering. He presides over the financial collapse of the Seven Kingdoms, enabling Robert Baratheon's ruinous spending and borrowing from half the known world while actively hiding the crown's true debts. He deliberately fosters corruption throughout King's Landing, shielding Janos Slynt and other criminals while convenient witnesses die. He poisons the political foundations of the realm by manipulating Lysa Arryn into murdering her husband, lying to her by telling her that to do so is to protect her son from Stannis. He then convinces her to frame the Lannisters in a letter to Catelyn, igniting the Stark-Lannister hostilities that become the War of the Five Kings. He exploits Catelyn's grief by lying about the Valyrian steel dagger used in Bran's attempted assassination, claiming Tyrion won it from him, a lie that directly leads to Tyrion's capture, Tywin's retaliatory invasion of the Riverlands, the destruction of towns and castles, and mass civilian slaughter. In short, Littlefinger engineers the chain reaction that kills tens of thousands, destroys most of the Riverlands, thrusts the entire realm into civil war, and ultimately kills Ned Stark. But his crimes extend well beyond politics. Littlefinger runs a network of brothels that covertly traffics women and children, the most horrifying example of this being Jane Poole, a 12-year-old girl whom he subjects to horrific levels of abuse and grooming so he can pass her off as Arya Stark. He then hands her over to the Boltons and plans to marry her to Ramsay Bolton, making Petyr directly complicit in the torture and assault that she endures in the north. His brothel system is implied to function similarly for many other women under his control. He arranges for Sir Lyn Corbray, a known child lover, to be supplied with young boys in exchange for political espionage. He frames the innocent singer Marillion for Lysa's murder, after having Mord, a jailer of House Arryn, torture and mutilate the man before his eventual execution. He ensures Dontos Allard's death after using him as a pawn to extract Sansa from King's Landing. He kills Lysa Arryn to seize control of the Vale, and he then manipulates her son's guardianship to secure long-term political dominance. Every action he takes is rooted in deception, exploitation, cruelty, and ruthless self-interest, with no larger ideology or trauma behind it, only the pursuit of power at any cost. In the novels, Littlefinger is responsible, directly or indirectly, for the deaths of kings, the collapse of the royal treasury, mass civilian suffering, strategic assassinations, false accusations leading to war, the destruction of the Riverlands, and the systematic exploitation and trafficking of both vulnerable children and adults. Far from being a misunderstood climber or tragic victim of class hierarchy and unrequited love, Petyr Baelish is one of the most destructive forces in Westeros, and his rap sheet confirms that he's a calculating psychopath whose rise to power is built entirely on blood, lies, and the suffering of others. If we look to his actions in the show, while several of his foundational crimes are present in both mediums, the show expands upon his depravity in many ways. Show Littlefinger is not merely a political schemer. He's a calculating predator whose schemes often revolve around inflicting suffering to destabilize others, all while positioning himself as the sole lifeline they can trust. One of the show's most grotesque expansions on his character is found in Littlefinger's role as a pimp and the way he manages his brothels, making it more visible than what we see in the novels. For starters, Littlefinger trains prostitutes in disturbing ways. He offers children like he does in the books, but we also learn that he supplies amputees and corpses as sexual novelties, and he maintains such an atmosphere of terror that Ros, the show's main prostitute character, lives in constant fear of him. When she shows emotional distress over the death of an infant, Littlefinger responds not with human sympathy, but with the cold warning, "I hate bad investments. They haunt me." His threat becomes literal when he hands Ros over to Joffrey to be tortured to death with a crossbow. The show depicts Littlefinger knowingly feeding a terrified woman to a sadistic boy king purely to maintain political favor and eliminate a potential leak in his network. He also destroys Varys' attempt to free Sansa by telling Olenna Tyrell of the planned marriage between her and Loras, which results in Sansa being trapped in King's Landing longer and Ros being exposed and killed. All these schemes serve no ideological purpose. They exist to sabotage Varys' influence and consolidate Baelish's. Perhaps the most infamous show-only transgression is Littlefinger arranging Sansa Stark's marriage to Ramsay Bolton. As we learned earlier, Martin has explicitly stated that his Littlefinger would never have done this, because Book Littlefinger is obsessed with Sansa as a Catelyn substitute, and he wouldn't hand her over to a sadist. But here, he willingly does so, knowing full well, or at least suspecting, the scale of Ramsay's depravity. His justifications, avenge your family from within, the North will rally behind you, reveal his true motive. He sees Sansa as a pawn whose suffering is an acceptable price for destroying the Boltons, an obstacle in his power game. After Sansa's assault, torture, and abuse, he offers a hollow apology and immediately tries to manipulate the situation to his advantage by winning her gratitude and dependence. This single act reveals the defining trait of the show version. Littlefinger is willing to sacrifice even the people he claims to love, brutally, visibly, and permanently, if it means ascending one rung higher. The show further expands his cruelty by making him complicit in the arrests of Loras and Margaery Tyrell. After the Sparrows seize control of King's Landing, Petyr sends one of his employees to testify against Loras, triggering the Tyrell siblings' imprisonment. When Olenna confronts him, he retaliates by giving her Lancel, a witness who can expose Cersei's crimes, which then leads to Cersei's arrest, Walk of Atonement, and torture by the Faith. In manipulating both families, he effectively engineers a cold war between the Tyrells and the Lannisters, one that brings about the extinction of House Tyrell. Again, he has no loyalty, no remorse, and no long-term ideology. Littlefinger sows catastrophic enmity simply to keep all the pieces in the air, expecting to benefit when they all fall. His treatment of Brienne of Tarth is also far more personal on screen. When Brienne tries to rescue Sansa, Littlefinger sabotages her efforts by publicly questioning her credibility, bringing up the oath she swore to Renly and Catelyn, and portraying her as unstable, prompting a violent confrontation that nearly kills her and Podrick. His only goal is to isolate Sansa emotionally, physically, and politically so that he remains her only perceived ally. Littlefinger's final season demonstrates that his manipulative instincts extend even to the Stark siblings. He attempts to set Arya and Sansa against each other by planning the letter Sansa wrote under Lannister coercion, whispering fears into Sansa's ear, and encouraging her to consider Arya a threat. Crucially, he also tries to manipulate Jon Snow's rule by insinuating romantic jealousy, implying Jon intends to marry Daenerys, which is designed to weaken Sansa's support for her brother. When confronted with the failure of his schemes, Littlefinger lies brazenly, denies all wrongdoing, and then collapses into pathetic pleading when exposed. Unlike the books, where his downfall may be clever, political, and judicial, the show frames his death as the end of an abuser caught by the very girl he tried to corrupt and manipulate. He dies choking on his own blood, begging, humiliated, putting this version of him to end, albeit not in the most narratively satisfying or fitting way. There are a couple of positive things he does, as the assassination of Joffrey, while implicating Tyrion and making his life a living hell, does remove a woefully ineffectual and cruel king from the picture, as putting Tommen on the throne was a slightly more positive development for the realm. He also helps Sansa and Jon eliminate the Boltons by assisting them during the Battle of the Bastards with the Knights of the Vale. However, since he's the one who put Joffrey on the throne and served as the catalyst for the Boltons to take power in the north, these things don't really mean too much. And at the end of the day, his crimes far outweigh any positives you can attribute to his character. When it comes down to it, after everything we've gone through in this video, Petyr Baelish can only be called one thing, and one thing only: a monster in the truest sense of the word. A man who was one of, if not the greatest threat to not just Westeros, but the entire world in this narrative. A man who came from what he perceived as nothing, who endeavored to gain everything, no matter the cost, becoming a mocking lord able to mimic and even exceed the capabilities of the brightest and most powerful of lords in all of Westeros. And surely, if he had gotten his way, the reign of Petyr Baelish, god of ambition and chaos, master of all and servant to none, would have been bought with oceans of blood and gone down in Westerosi history as being a tyrannical reign unmatched by any other. An era of chaos and death, where any man may make his fortune so long as he's willing to eviscerate all before him. And for being a dark manifestation of the cruelest and most dangerous aspects of a culture built on power, intrigue, and bloodshed, there is no doubt that Petyr Baelish is a villain who we should find no sympathy for, and a man whose entire persona was built brick by brick with evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Littlefinger? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially Elijah Kai VA and Effigy, our Dark Lord channel members. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.